something further complex could use that consciousness. So if consciousness exists, which it seems like it does, and maybe that's like another question, like,
I
are we
don't know.
just,
Are you conscious? I
we
think
could
I
just
am.
be, but we could think
I'm like,
that, and we could literally just be the movement of subatomic particles moving forward, and this is the most logical way. Like, it creates
or
hormones, because hormones are created by
we
chemicals, which
were
are created by
created
polypeptide
by
chains.
a computer as well.
I mean, these
All
peptide chains might
simultaneous.
exist literally just so that we produce the symmetry necessary, because biology is memory of chemical memory. So we could be just, it all could just be a lie. And this is coming from a guy who doesn't
Well,
believe
that's
this. I'm just saying that's the,
epigenetics. That's huge. Like the
but I don't think that
epigenetics.
that's true, because we
Has
end up
anyone
having too
discussed
many.
epigenetics mixed with the CRISPR tech yet? And like,
So we
because
should, because someone earlier on Base AF, they were talking about I brought up CRISPR as like, the point is like CRISPR proves that in God, in a sense. I was this reductionist, but this idea that CRISPR
it
kind of
kind of got
proves.
it proves an intelligent design, which essentially is conscious creation, which is
But they're,
God.
they were thinking that CRISPR meant specifically genetic modification by humans created in 2012, and it's not that. CRISPR is clustered regularly, interspaced, short palindromic repeats, and these DNA sequences, family of DNA sequences, exist in the genomes of tons of prokaryotic organisms, right? Like all sorts of things from Apisthoconta in mushrooms and humans, etc. So CRISPR is something that's been existing since the very beginning, and it's
Okay.
not. Yeah.
So we need to go back to the prior topic. Just my atheistic response is, what stops CRISPR from evolving? Okay, back to the prior thing. You're making this paradigm about how consciousness evolves with complexity, and if it keeps getting more complex, maybe there's a God at the end that's super complex consciousness. My problem is you go back and you get stupider. And you go back to the primordial elements, you get stupider consciousness. So how is there a God at the beginning if you go back in time and everything is stupider?
So the idea that time exists is this idea of creation of material radiation that's destroying these particles. But if these particles are arrangements of subatomic particles, which are really just energy, right, then there's no reason for that consciousness to be affected by the arrangement of this space-time. So this is a problem that's been solved almost, but we're not quite finished there. But you look at Nima Arkani Hamed, which has been my obsession recently. He's a physicist who, did work that proposed like Higgs boson research, etc. He's been trying to disprove space-time, but not disprove it. Right, he's not just being cocky. He's trying to come up with a more subtle description of what is that actual arrangement of subatomic particles that we're calling space-time, because we seem to have something that we're considering linear, but that's not something that we can explain because of quantum entanglement. So probably space-time is the illusion itself, which is, again, like a
it's
religious
essentially a
argument.
higher
Most religions have said
dimension
that. Well,
or
it's that energy itself is arranging itself in space time. So we're thinking of energy and mass as different, but we should really acknowledge the idea that mass is just arrangements of energy, right? And so at
and
the
is
end of
there
the day, it's a
conscious
constant.
energy contained within that
It
mass?
seems like if the energy is able to arrange itself in all of these ways, that seems kind of like a sign of intelligence.
Right,
So okay,
self-organization.
so here's the problem. Like the whole emergence reduction paradigm. It's like you have this complex human, but you zoom in and it's like smaller layers of detail, smaller layers of detail, and it's like getting like more and more simple building blocks, and you go all the way down to the bottom. It's just these dumb atoms moving around, right?
How
And
dumb are
so,
these atoms?
well, they're dumb enough to be predictable in like chemical reactions. Like, oh, here's an
Right,
Humans are
because
equation.
you get
predictable,
that. Well,
you
you
know.
break down an atom and you go even further to the what's the famous cat or no the photon. If you're looking at it, it's
Heisenberg
like a
uncertainty
particle.
principle.
If you're not,
Right, it strikes a
yeah,
pose.
right. Like
Heisenberg
that
uncertainty
seems like it's
principle.
conscious.
But
Uh,
even beyond that, just the idea that things are arranging themselves, so it doesn't really matter if they're conscious or not. In the same way, it doesn't matter if we're conscious or not. But because it feels like we're conscious, that's why it seems like it's worth investigating that idea. Because if things were just arrangement, and like the idea that atoms are stupid, or like just because they're predictable, like I would argue pretty much anything is predictable. Like we're at a point now where we can pretty much predict everything for 3 days, right?
I'm
So do you think
predictable.
are you like a skeptic? Is there no such thing as a hierarchy of intelligence? Is your intelligence the same as an atom?
I think that the capacity to
Oh,
use intelligence changes with the gathered complexity. So the fact that I'm made up of many atoms, and those atoms are able to experience many things, and they're able to create waves that are interacting with other coherencies, and that those also come from quantum entanglement. There's levels even beyond the most obvious of speaking, right? Like, not, I'm not getting even into psychicism or anything else like that, but I think that
Okay.
we are gathered complexity, and so that's
Do
why
you
if many humans gathered in complexity, they would be godlike in terms of our understanding what that means.
do you know about Michael Levine's work? Michael Levine, he's like a biologist that he uses computational models to study
Right.
bacteria.
Yeah.
He's like
I actually
totally
like him. He's cool.
he's got a ton of discoveries that are he's got like 3 discoveries, like cured cancer, discovered the bioelectricity foundation for consciousness. He's doing some crazy shit.
Yeah.
Like replicating limbs, like all this crazy stuff. He's got a paradigm for intelligence that's kind of measurable. He's saying like you can measure intelligence is if they can they have a goal, and like they can calculate different optional pathways to. So if there's an obstacle, it's like they can react to change in their environment, and they can adapt and come up with different solutions to get to the goal, right?
I was the 61st person to see this video, and I don't think anyone else has seen it since. So please, everyone, go find the Michael Levine "What Are Cognitive Light Cones" video.
well,
This
he's
is
sharing
really
it with the world right
fascinating.
now.
This is a freaking fascinating video, and like he built this map on this idea of like, if you look at it, the first thing I thought, and the reason I latched onto this, was it reminded me of Chardin's map of the noosphere, right? This is essentially the same concept. So I don't see it as a problem, because what you're saying essentially is that future and past, if we start to move away from space time, and by the way, Michael Levine is a friend and collaborator with Nami, Nima Hamed. So they're both working in the same field. Like, in general, what's going to emerge is this idea that we're gathering in complexity in our ability to move and to connect to other arrangements. But we're even going to think of that eventually differently. That's the thing. So consciousness isn't necessarily even like what would you say to like how do you think like an anthill would look at humanity? Like how, like, because like hive mind insects, how would they think of the human consciousness experience, right? Like, there's a lot of different consciousness on this world, and like even crabs, like there's all this cancification, right? Crabification. Like, how are they looking at the fact that we're not a swarm species, or that we don't have that we train our young in ways, right? Like, we have like that they don't have just instinct. Like, we are very unique in a lot of ways, but these are all ways that are helping us gather information that is useful in commanding it.
Yeah. So back to the atom thing, I would just say like the atoms, they like to react with some things and they don't like to react with other things. So you could kind of impute a goal structure to an atom, but like if the atom is intelligent, it would like know how to navigate to the desired chemical reaction. But atoms, I don't believe they display any type of goal navigator behavior.
Carbon likes to socialize, Hydrogen is kind of solitary, There's certain kinds of things that these atoms do. Like, men look for women. I feel like atoms aren't that different than us. In the same way, like, machines aren't that different. You could break it down, and you could find how these things are. We're really compelled by, and if you couldn't, then you wouldn't be able to say we evolved from these things, right? Because we are made of these things.
Yeah, but like when you add 10 dice together, there's a lot more optionality. One dice is more stupid than 10 dice. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I guess like I would say that primal doesn't necessarily mean stupid, right? Like prime numbers, right? Primordial. Like, I don't think that. I think maybe you could galvanize primes. And it might be that there's a value to something's inherent nature, right? That's probably what I think is so fascinating to spiritualists. They're saying that there's an inherent nature which is striving forward.
This intelligence skepticism is fascinating. So, would you apply this to animals too? Do you think that animals are equally intelligent to humans?
I think equal is a really weird way to look at things, but I think that they're qualitatively intelligent. You could easily talk to a dog and get it to respond. You can notice the social pods of dolphins and of orcas and see how much more
Yeah,
sophisticated.
any animal with the body language, right? It's body language, like making that eye contact with an animal, and you're able to speak with it
Yeah.
through
Right.
body language, essentially.
I'd also say that they're not like the idea that humans are just so much more advanced. It's just I can't. I think that we do have some uniqueness, like some sort of alien uniqueness of Lacanian language. But beyond that, like humans are probably like a freak, in that sense from regular biology. And in regular biology, there's a lot more empathy, intuition, pheromone response. It's like the pheromone communication so much clearer with almost every other species than humans. And humans
Yeah.
actively try to mask and confuse, and not learn. We don't have education. Children should be literally learning about pheromones like in school. Right, not just for sex ed when they get to junior high. It should be like, how do you understand if someone's a threat or someone's nervous, or all these, go with your gut, these kinds of things. This is what other animals are naturally training to do so they can
Real,
survive.
real biochemistry.
Right.
So, like, if I was to put intelligent, like, if I was to plot things, if we had like a spectrum of intelligence from 0% to 100%, if I was to plot it, I'd put humans at 100%. I'd put
Really?
dogs. Dogs are maybe, I don't know, 50%. Mice are maybe 10%. Bacteria maybe 1%, and atoms are like 0.0001%. Like,
So
does
I
that?
definitely wouldn't put humans at the top. Let's start with that. I maybe would put squid like 20 points above
I was going to say
humans.
maybe an octopus.
Yeah, like squid would be 20 points above humans easily, because they live 18 months. They basically reincarnate. They're telepathic. Their entire bodies can communicate an entire language of data to the next. Like, come on. But beyond squid, what's another dolphins? Because dolphins are very similar to humans, but they don't need to. Well, dolphins like swim all day. They have
Yeah.
less crime, some, but less. And they, in general, dolphins are, they don't need razors and razor phones and razor scooters. You know what I mean? Like, they're just, dolphins are, I think, obviously superior to humans, too. There's a number of examples. But beyond that, not your point. Your point being, like, what was it below that? Okay, also insects. Insects probably above humans because of the hive.
Insects?
Yeah, the swarm
The
intelligence. The
hive.
fact that you could be a
I kid
drone.
you not. So I have to tell this story that
Please do.
I had like a couple chameleons, and I was feeding them waxworms and also cricket. Or I was feeding it crickets. The crickets hid in the moss, and then I was like, okay, I got to feed it something. So I got it some waxworms. I dropped a waxworm in. As soon as it dropped, four crickets,
Aaron.
one from each corner, came from their little burrows, and they like chirped at each other, and they simultaneously came in, pack hunted, and killed, ate, tore it apart, and took it back into the burrows.
Yeah.
So it's like
Can't mess
that
with
displays some pretty intelligence.
Yeah.
Like, who
All right.
knows? There's
Now,
something more to just the brain.
even beyond insects, right? Let's go with like what's even more intelligent than any other animal. Than any other animal is kind of the trick question here. Mushrooms. Mushrooms are obviously more intelligent than any other animal. They're communicating. They're able to communicate at vast distances. They're able to send neurohormones, the same neurohormones and transmitters that we use for our dream state, to communicate perfectly. Right. This is beyond pheromone research. This is straight up. This is me sending you my experience.
Mycelium network.
This is a homeostasis cathedral, right? So as you get to these levels, I think you find like more and more complexity. So what we have is like the capacity to not know. We're like able to be ignorant. We have a tabula rasa experience, and then we're able to conjecture with metatag. So your dad tells you, like, believe this, but he might also tell you, like, don't trust Mexicans, and you have to choose, like, do I believe? Luckily, I don't have to believe everything my dad says. I don't have to memory everything. I could just maybe figure out what the nuance was there. Maybe it wasn't Mexicans, maybe it was the French in Mexico in the 19th century. I don't know. Like, maybe he had a specific experience, but like I don't have to let that control my life, which is why it's important for humans to forget every generation, and yet still have the capacity for epigenetic responses, which is, the other things, we're training people to have epigenetic responses to
I
what we
was
want
just
them to have
thinking
in
though,
society.
epigenetics though, and does epigenetics span all species and life forms, and does it go down into
Totally.
fungi, into other life forms, and then that's a complete larger complexity of overall intelligence and memory, encoded into life that we're just beginning to even notice exists yet
So,
understand.
but that is interesting. Like basic success point. Then if we get down to like the base root there, his point is like these things are all assembled, essentially by. And first we've got the single-celled organisms, and I would say single-celled organisms are intelligent because they know that they want to live tomorrow, and so they do this by finding goals, priority driven pattern recognition systems, just like AI, find goals and they figure out, okay, I will be able to survive if I consume this. And they're in the primordial soup, and eventually they become colonies. And a colony might be interesting because you've got a strand, right? And we call these like the primordial soup snakes. But these strands might be able to say, okay, well, I'll bend, and you bend. And so we'll become a mouth. It's a bay, right? And then anything that comes into our bay, we'll be able to close it. And so this is the first colonies in a sense, right? So, but we haven't gotten to atoms. But I think even the point here is you can see that there's some complexity of intelligence even at that level.
Well, we ourselves are made up of trillions of these colonies too, right? Like of these colonies of cells
Yeah,
that make
and
up human itself.
that proves it on so many levels, Bernie. Because you look at the social body, the political body, and the political body is this representation of the eukaryote, this idea of the specialized hierarchy. You get the brain up here, because this is again these colonies say, okay, you know what, you guys keep being the mouth. And you know what, some of you guys become teeth, and we'll become you guys become the digestive tract, and you guys become the colon, but we'll be the brain, right? And when that happened, then you have a split, which is the eukaryotes out of Apisthoconta that become animalius. But the ones that say no, we're going to keep anarchy. We're going to keep doing our thing. I'm going to be a neuron. I'm going to be a stomach. I'm going to be a lung. I'm going to be anything I want to be. My kids can be anything. That's the mushroom, right? That's a non hierarchical social
It'll be one
body.
of those stem cells.
Right. So, I mean, we see that. I think that also proves at a certain level a certain kind of intelligence because, regardless if it's ideological, like I kind of anthropomorphize that.
So
But you can
sorry,
think of
what
it.
about ants? Where any of the drone worker ants, if the queen dies, can then simultaneously become that queen. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
So,
like, yeah.
so to
that
tie
takes
to
it
tie.
so right.
So I just to wrap this conversation back to the original point, like the hierarchy that I'm building, it's like humans, other animals, bacteria, and then the atoms, and then like the quantum foam or whatever. It's like it's less and less intelligent. And so if you want to put God at the bottom of that, it's like God is the least intelligent thing in this hierarchy. That's
Could
my
be.
issue.
I mean,
Could it, but could
if you're
also
saying
be
that the structure,
simultaneously the smartest, but
yeah.
exists with
So there's two things that
above this dimension. We only experience it as the dumbest. Outside of it, it is the most intelligent, and we are all part of it potentially. Could
See, I
that?
know like people don't always understand Bernie, but what he said was brilliant. Trust me. What he just said, because what it is it's like, and again, it's like the
Sorry.
Bible says, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. You know what I mean? Like you don't get to see the complexity. You only get to see your own complexity, and from that draw conclusions about further complexity. So like Bernie, that's exactly right. That's the situation. We're not in a situation where we've seen everything so that we can. And as we start to see things of it, we're like, oh well, this part. And this is why like abiogenesis is such an interesting study because it's a confluence of geology, chemistry, astrophysics, and femto or nano quantum physics. Because you have to see each part of it and then apply it into a mathematical equation that can work, and you can say, okay, well, from what we see here and what we see here, then we're filling in, because otherwise what you have is the same thing that religions have always had, which is a god of gaps, right? And so we're trying to fill in the god of gaps. So I get it. Like you're saying, like, is this mean that God is gathering in complexity? At very least, like, because if we're saying that God started out as this simple energy consciousness or something, and we're presupposing that
Well,
before us there's no complexity, then you're saying that God is reflective and God is learning. And this is something that people, don't like. I'm okay with it. I have no problem with this idea that as we become complex, that right ahead of us is the thing that's become us and is shaped into us and is playing us and it's learned from that experience. I have no problem with that. But at the end of the day, it still means that at the beginning, there is this drive, this function to colonize, to live. These kind of divine principles of numbers, like we're talking about, these things seem like once you get further down, once you're getting even beyond cells, and you're starting to talk about again atoms, and you're looking at how atoms are structured, you're seeing these amazing symmetries again, right? So even there, like in the symmetries, those symmetries look very similar to our astronomical observations, right? Macro and microcosmic. So it seems like it is, and this is proven by math because you look at the Mandelbrot algorithm, and fractals occur at the largest and the smallest level. So it just seems also like it would be improbable
fractals are
for
a
us to
perfect
find a point.
example. Because fractals are both infinite and finite, all within themselves. So that's kind of essentially what we are as our own little consciousness on this third dimensional realm. And it actually, Seth's stacking model is correct, but it's that some sort of God intelligence is of a higher dimensional complexity in existence that we ourselves cannot comprehend within our own finite but infinite existence and experience, is how I would perceive it. Because y'all I'm tying into, sorry, I'll let you continue, Seth, and sorry to talk, but the Russian model of the 3 stages of you can control your planet, then your solar system, and
Kardashev.
then the universe, so time. Yeah, the Kardashev aspect of it.
So I was thinking that this might be an interesting point to segue into our math discussion, Andreas, because our math discussion it hit all of these issues, like the emergence versus complexity at base reality, fractal dimensions. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
I mean, we'll start with what you're which part are you talking about specifically?
So, do you want me to pull up the write-up I did on our mathematical conversation?
Yes, that'd be perfect. There we go.
Let me find it.
Part of the thing is, while you're doing that, I was looking at James Tour, who did a great conversation with Ian Crossland earlier, and I saw his video from Professor Dave Explains, who, he's not perfect. David says horrible things sometimes, and he's wrong about a lot of things, and I don't think he quite won his argument as much as he thinks he did with Tour. But Tour didn't do very well when he went to Leroy Cronin's debate at Harvard, and I thought this was a really fantastic video. It's not to do with Dave really and his interjections, but just the actual conversations that came up talking about applied mathematics, and we can't just choose. Did you find the paper?
Yeah, I got it.
There we go.
Can you see that?
TranscendentPhilosophy.com.
Oh yeah, baby. So I have to scroll through this. You can see me scrolling.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So yeah, kind of like the premise of the kind of the contradiction that this investigation is addressing. There's kind of this interesting thought process. Maybe people have critiqued this word. Pi is an infinitely irrational number. It's a string of random numbers going all the way down, and so complex is a tricky word, but it seems kind of complex. And it seems like pi manifests naturally in nature at base reality, right? And so the conclusion is maybe base reality is infinitely complex as opposed to simple. And so this conclusion contradicts my paradigm. I operate under the emergence paradigm, which is we start with simple stuff and it emerges towards the complex stuff. And so I was puzzled by this conclusion that contradicted my paradigm, right? And so the following mathematical investigation was me trying to get to the bottom of what's going on here. If we keep going down, does it get infinitely complex at the bottom, or is it stupid and simple at the bottom, right? Very relevant to this conversation.
Right. Do you find it to, I mean, you can continue, but do you find it to be getting simpler? I mean, obviously that's kind of the point of pi, right? As it continues to become more complex.
Do you want me to speed run this or kind of walk through this?
Go right through it. Does take your
Okay.
time.
Okay. So
I want the full experience.
I didn't catch that.
I was saying, please continue with the full experience. Like, this fascinates me.
Yeah. This was a journey. Like, I walked through this mental journey. This was Andreas. I was talking with Andreas the other day. We were talking about, like different bases in mathematics. We were talking about how to add in base 3. And at first, Andreas was talking about it in terms of a pi, but then he switched to a pizza to not confuse us with the numeric pi. But luckily, my mind latched onto this. I'm like, there's got to be a connection here, right? If the basal paradigm of mathematics is kind of related to a circle, there's got to be a connection to the actual pi. So I started to think, what's the connection here? And the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, well, this pi, it seems to be irrational, and it seems to be central to physics and reality, and like, how are we to conceptualize this? And then like this whole basal paradigm, I started to hypothesize. I'm like, we can't understand pi with like base 10 mathematics. It's just too weird. What if we change the base and suddenly pi becomes rational? What if nature is using a different base and we're just confused because we're operating based on our fingers, but we're anthropomorphizing math. We need to switch to nature's paradigm. So I was trying to explore what paradigm makes pi more intuitive, right? Please jump in if you have any thoughts at this point.
No, this is great.
Except that I think we can count with 12. Geometric model making.
I just want to say, like, with 12, right? Because, like, when people say count with your fingers, like, until, like, the French, about 150, 200 years ago, people used to count with their thumb, and they would count the 3 parts of their finger. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So you can, if you were to count your fingers, with your thumb, you get 12 on your hand. So the 12-base system was far more common until they latched onto the decimal system because of calculation equipment they had.
So I'll continue here. So I was trying to figure out which paradigm would work better, and I looked into like the Wikipedia. People have already started doing this.
I was trying to find this too. Did you find like, so what's the deal? Base 4 or like pi to be equal 4 or pi to be equal 3? What was the one that you liked?
So well, here they've got base 2, base 3, base 16, and base 60, right? So base 2, it's 11.0010010000001111111. Like it looks random if you just keep looking through it. Base 3, it's 10.010211. Yeah, it still looks incoherently random. Base 16, you got like some letters in there. That's incoherent.
Oh, you got froze for a second. You got froze, Seth. We're waiting for you. The first 38 digits in ternary base 3 are like a IP address, bro.
Oh, it's a hexadecimal.
Wait, go. What? Are you there, Seth? Because you got frozen when you started talking about this. It must have been important.
Oh, I don't know where I cut off. How many seconds?
I think you were at base 3. I think is where you were at, describing.
Okay.
In base 3.
Okay. Yeah, base 3.
Just went into containing also letters.
Yeah. Letters.
So we went from a binary mathematical repeating system to multiple numbers to then also including letters.
Well, the reason for letters, let me just explain this really quickly. The 12 base math. Let me just show him again because we did this before, but
sure.
So if you were to count and you're counting to 10, you know that there are 10 digits in a whole 10, right? And this comes back to his pizza thing he was looking at, pizza slices, because when you were to say that, what is it? It's a pizza, right? It's a number, right? And how many pieces of the pizza are there? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is in base 8. Okay, so what we do is when we get to 8, there is a whole pizza. So if you were to count like 16, that's 2 pizzas. Okay, but if this was the 12 pieces of pizza, you'd have a problem because you can't count to 12 without creating new numbers. You'd have to say this was a 10-piece pizza plus 2 pieces of pizza, right? If it was a 10, if that's how we were counting, if we're counting to 10. So what you do is you create new numbers, right? So what you do is you actually just name those other 2 numbers. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, dec L, dough, right? And so we think of dough as 10 because 10 is a whole pizza, but here 10 just represents dough. It represents a whole 12-piece pizza, right? So that's base 12. That's what that means. So if we were counting in hexadecimal, you're going to need a whole bunch of things. You can't just have dec and L and dough. You're going to need to count all the way up to 60, right? And so counting up to 60, you're going to introduce a whole bunch of new numbers because they don't exist. It's not enough to have just 10 numbers if you have a 60 number system. Each number is going to need its own symbol because each number is its own special piece of pie.
On each higher mathematical system that you're running, it's also increasing the fractals dimensional complexity, essentially, like the amount of numbered complexity of that fractal system.
Well, it's just like it's like you're counting to 10, and 10 is X here, right? But like you have to have extra numbers because there's extra pieces of pie. Like you got to think of it like a pie. Like if you were, and the problem is people are so used to counting to 10. If you weren't so used to counting to 10, this would come naturally to you to count to 12 with extra numbers, right? Like to count those extra numbers. But like so because you're not like so this is the problem. Like you just have to imagine that 10 is X, right? So this is dec, and then L, right, is 11, and then 12, right? Because it's like a clock. And when you realize that you've been using a clock all your life, and you've been using duodecimal system, it's not that confusing, right? Like you've been doing this forever, but they've kind of confused you by making it into a decimal system. Sorry, I don't know if that was confusing or not, but
yeah. So just to add
that's
on
why
that,
you see letters, you know.
yeah, for the base 16, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then once you get to 9, you've got like a bit more till you get to 16. So 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then 10 is equivalent to 16. So whatever your base is, 10 is equivalent to the fullness of the base. So for base 12, 10 is equivalent to 12. For base 16, 10 is equivalent to 16, right? And so 20 is equivalent to 2 times the base, and 30 is equivalent to 3 times the base, right? That's how to think about switching bases.
Base being a pie and how many pizza pies there are, right? Because like exactly. I think the real problem is people shouldn't look at number strings. They should look at circles. They should look at geometry, and then they should say, okay, this is a whole number, and then this is these are fractions. This is a 12th of that number. And when you start to break the idea down into like a Neoplatonic solid, then you can fraction it however you want. But we're so confused by what numbers are. We stare at them and we're just like, oh, and I think it's mainly because they're not designed for humans. These numbers are designed for computers.
Yeah, so basically the main point here is that my project of investigating other bases failed miserably, right? In base 2, base 3, base 16, base 60, none of these expressions of pi are coherent and simple and intuitive to the human mind, right? And that was my goal, to figure out, can we switch pi into a different base and make it comprehensible, right? But I continued on, and so then I had a new idea. And so the new idea is, well, what if pi is the base, right? Instead of like all of these whole numbers, these integers, maybe that doesn't translate to pi. Maybe we need 3.14159 as the base, right? And then I tried to conceptualize, that's a tricky thing to conceptualize. How do you do decimal system into your base, right? And just on the face of it,
Irony there is that you said decimal.
yeah.
It should just be fractions. Yeah.
Well, so like if you think about it in terms of base 3, like you can count to base 3, but then you've got a leftover. So like if you're cutting the pi into base 3, but it's actually base pi, you've got a sliver of pizza left over, and that sliver is equivalent to the remainder, modulus 3 on the pi, right? 0.14159, right? And so that doesn't work to cut it on base 3. But then the question is, how do you actually cut it to pi? Because this decimal, it trails infinitely. And so I didn't know how to do that. So I decided to just experiment with base 314, right? It's like, okay, let's see if we can conceptualize base 314, see if that guides us to anywhere intuitive, right? But I was coming up with the same problem, which is, there's a little bit of remainder. You've got the 0.159 remainder infinity. And so I started thinking about this geometrically. Like if you were to draw a circle with a bunch of like geometric lines, right? You could use 314 line segments to approximate a circle, right? Just like line segment, line segment, line segment, 300 of these line segments in a circle, 314 of them, you get an approximate circle, but if you zoom in, it's not that good of a circle. That's why we need to blow it up, right? So instead of counting to 314, we need to count to 3,141. No, that's not good enough. If we zoom in, it's still too rough. It's too many line segments. We need to even out these line segments. And so the problem is you have to keep expanding your base infinitely. But then if you're counting through your base, if your base is infinite, you can never complete the pi. And so this project failed as well. I was like, it's incoherent to count to infinity. So
You know about the compass rose?
No.
So the compass rose, if you were to be on a sailing ship at some point, or if you look at a dollar bill, right, because it's on there hidden amongst the stars, is this idea of the 90-degree Let's start with, all of your math would have been easier to do, I was thinking as a joke, like earlier, with the compass, right, and then with a calculator. Because and when I say compass, I mean, of course, like, where is it? Like a compass, like a compass. Come on, compass. Angle. Come on, man. Like a compass, like these guys. Because once you're able to use a compass, then you can plot and you can start to like create. And you can see it, like this is an amazing way to like see math, and you're like, okay, yeah, this proves it, because if it's following this angle completely, then we know that this would be like, and this is an approximation, it's not to scale or whatever, but it will be correct about angles, right? And so you can figure out maybe 22/7, right? So 22/7 isn't perfect, but we think of pi as 22/7, right? And so, or you think of pi as less than 22/7 as an approximation. So using pi as 22/7, then you might use base 7 math, 7, and with base 7 math, then all of a sudden you can geometry. Then all of a sudden you can start approximating pretty amazing things with pi, right? And so pi doesn't have to be a perfect number, because what it's doing, it's finding perfect numbers, right? It's the tool that proves that that shape and form and everything else have to follow.
Right? It's both finite and infinite all within itself. That's what makes these fractals, these separate dimensions, are so, I guess, dimensionally relevant when scaling between.
It's a divine principle, but so like when you think about it, like you're like, oh, that sucks. Why? Because 22/7 is not pi, right? 22/7 is convert to decimal in 10 base math is 3.142. So it should be 3.14159. Instead this is slightly off, right? But the thing is, it doesn't matter. Because when you're able to do the math, in geometry, and you're able to prove its function and use, that ends up being more important than finding like the actual perfect like design of pi. And that's why. So for a long time they used the compass rose. The compass rose only has 33 points, right? But those 33 points make it perfect for looking at 180 to 360 degrees. Right, or they were able to chart the stars perfectly using just 33 points, right? So I mean, I think I'm sorry if that's not your point.
Well, just I guess my counterpoint would be like maybe like the inaccuracy of 22/7 doesn't seem like a big deal at one layer of analysis, but like if scale is important, if we're zooming in. That small difference becomes a big difference when you zoom in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I think it's always interesting to like find more resolute answers, but at the end of the day, it's like the numbers have to do with immaterial principles. So the immaterial principles are going to be reflective no matter how deep we go. It's like the Mandelbrot equation. Hold on, Mandelbrot. Because Mandelbrot, people talk about Mandelbrot a lot because we love his picture. Everyone's seen this. I love his picture. I love his picture because I think he's adorable. He looks like a Soviet dictator from the 80s.
You have interesting taste, Andreas.
It's true. I admit it, wholeheartly. But the reason this is so interesting was because like 40 years ago, you could type into a computer FC of Z is equal to Z squared plus C, right? And you could maybe change, and this is a thing that people do, is like you can change and sequence these, these functions. But from that, you're able to produce these incredible patterns. And they could do this on like really rudimentary, simple, primal computers back in the 80s, like 82. You could generate these kinds of things. So it was just like, as you go deeper, you can find out like more and more specificity about, those numbers, right? And you can continually go deeper and deeper. But I think that's kind of the point. Is like, how deep are you going to go before you recognize that it's like, it's always going to be complexity. It's always going to be symmetry. It's never going to be disorder. Oh, are you muted? You're muted.
Oh, are we ready to go back to the exploration?
Sure. I want to play it.
I sense the ground breaking beneath my soul.
I know he doesn't like.
I sense the heavens crumble, losing control.
Like, hey,
I sense my pulse quicken a rhythmic beat.
If you were to like,
Whenever you draw near, can't deny
play this
me.
with the Mandelbrot. Okay.
Oh, baby, when I catch your gaze,
that's so right. Bernie's smart.
soft as a breeze on a summer day. Oh, darling, it's hard to bear when you look at me that way. Hey, do you feel that quake beneath your feet? Do you sense the shake, a rhythmic beat? Do you feel your heart start to sway? Whenever I'm around, do you feel the same way? Ooh, darling, when
Sorry, I just love that. That's nice.
I was getting into the zone, man.
See, I can make you like music. I shouldn't laugh out loud and wake people up. No, but what was the next thing you wanted to get into? I'm sorry.
There's more stuff to go over on the next phase of this mathematical.
Base. This does not stop. So this is where I leave the room and you keep going really hard.
We're not even halfway, man. This goes hard.
Dude, this is epic. Okay.
Okay, so like I was kind of pissed. I'm like, okay, all of these bases, the base strategy is failing. Like, how the heck are we supposed to conceptualize pi? Because it doesn't make sense that base reality has this stupid complex number, right? So I'm looking up all these equations. I'm like, well, that's not intuitive and simple. That's not intuitive and simple. That's not intuitive and simple. That one's it's kind of approaching coherence, but not completely. And then this equation was the one that clicked for me. I'm like, boom, got it. Pi makes sense. It's intuitive. It's simple. Base reality is not this incoherent blob of infinitely random numbers. This is the solution right here. Basal problem. This was solved by Euler. Euler was the genius who he found the Euler identity. Not relevant. Okay, so the way I intuited this, I'm being like for intuition pump's sake, right? I'm intuiting the left side of the equal sign. I'm just thinking of this in terms of a geometric circle. I know it's not the exact equation for a circle. Just bear with me for purposes of intuiting what's going on. Think of it as a circle, right? Now, to the right of this equal sign, how are we accruing the shape, the area of the circle, right? And so this I'm intuiting as an infinite series, a sigma summation of the area of the circle, right? So what's going on here? You've got n equals 1, n equals 2, n equals 3, n equals 4, n equals 5, n equals all the way up to infinity, right? What does it mean when this is being squared, right? In terms of area, we know that x squared is the area of a square, right? And so what we're building right here is a bunch of squares. We've got a 1 times 1 square, a 2 times 2 square, 3 times 3 square, 4 times 4 square to infinity, right? Now, the way to think about this infinitely incrementing series, you need to think of it in terms of resolution, right? So for like a camera or for an image, you've got pixelation going on, and you've got like the resolution is the number of pixels. So a 1 by 1 image is just 1 pixel. A 2 by 2 image is, 2 width, 2 height. You've got 4 pixels. So we're increasing our resolution infinitely. And what this pi, so the circle, the area of the circle is equivalent to a big pixel. So the numerator is 1 pixel. 1 pixel at the denominator is the resolution. So we've got 1 pixel at the big resolution, 1 pixel at a more zoomed in resolution, another pixel at an even deeper resolution. And so what's going on is we're just accumulating area. We're accumulating pixels with increasing zoom, and the pixels are getting smaller and smaller as we increase our zoom, right? And so what happens is the edge of the circle, at one layer of analysis, at one layer of resolution, we've got an imperfect curve. But with infinitely iterating zoom, you can see here, you've got like the first layer of zoom, you've got the second layer of zoom, the third layer, the fourth layer. And if you infinitely increase your zoom, you're pushing your pixels outwards towards the perfect ideal, right? And so like this pixel here, this is inaccurate. We've got to push these pixels outward to get a better curvature. And so the fundamental nature of pi is infinitely incrementing the pixels to go towards that curve. That was kind of the mathematical conclusion I came to here. So we can pause at this
and
point.
as you pull up this, could go up just a little bit to that graph there, right?
Yeah.
Because like looking, this is interesting for a lot of reasons, and we see this in nature. You might think of a mushroom cloud where it goes up to a certain point and then it can't go up, so it starts to go out, right? There's like physics to why mushrooms do that. I think that video from 3 Brown 1 Blue about pi is interesting, where you show blocks on a track and they're clacking into each other. Do you remember that one?
No.
Hold on a second. 3 3 brown, 1 blue pi. Just really quickly, the collision video. So you take
yeah.
you take a kilogram and you take 100 to the power of 12 of -1, 12 minus 1 kilograms, right? And you bounce them into each other, and what ends up happening is they will bounce into each other exactly like when they clink.
Yeah.
They'll
Yeah.
bounce into each other the exact number of pi, right? And the reason is because pi is a function, it's a curve that occurs because there's a difference quotient of energy. Like if you throw a ball, it rises and then it falls. It goes far and then it falls. There's a amount of momentum, and then there's entropy, and then there's loss of force, and then there's there's natural forces, right? So, but this all happens and occurs in a curve. So this all follows pi naturally. So pi is this natural function that you find it over and over again. It doesn't have to be in what we think of as like geometry and curve either. It can just exist in entropy of physics.
So in your example, the pi was representing the number of collisions.
Yeah.
How can you have? Shouldn't the number of collisions be an integer?
Well, so it's based on the. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Based on the size between the size ratio quotient, the amount of digits of pi which will occur.
Oh, so it's a truncated pi.
Yeah.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
as you increase mass, the more pi you can measure. So
Oh.
this becomes really interesting when you get into subatomic particles, because you brought up earlier, like talking about like subatomic particles, like just understanding how protons, electrons, neutrons. I don't know if you really believe in electrons, but just the idea of spin and valence. I mean, even just like. So at some point, I forget, someone asked like how many people really exist in the world, and I said 6. I was gonna say probably 9 because of the Enneagram, but I guess you could say like 17, because if everything's made up of arrangements, and just look at the names also, like up, charm, top, down, strange, bottom, right? These are some of the names, but tau and tau neutrinos, right?
Sounds kinky.
Yeah, there's like, I mean, for sure, this is the thing. Like, they have personality, and this is the way that they, like, scientists are actually, like, acknowledging quarks, because quarks are quirky, and they end up making, they make social decisions, right? So, I mean, I think that's what we're starting to find is, like, at the lowest level, there's social decisions, like maybe these are even engendered states of being, like a fundamental level that exists, and we see arrangements of these over and over again in material form, like as hydrogen, for instance, right?
Yeah. So are you positing a type of panpsychism then? Personality and consciousness at every layer?
I don't think so. I think doesn't panpsychism. What's up, yoga poser?
Hello.
I think did we have someone else and we lose him? What happened
Yeah.
to Bernie? Bernie will be back.
He dropped.
Oh,
Well,
his
you
computer
guys were
crashed.
calling
Good to
my
see you,
name
Yoga.
specifically. I Seth, by the way, I'm Steph, and I heard you
Good to
say
have
we're
you for the
building
first time,
squares.
yoga.
You said we're building squares, right? And are you talking about the audience member? We're trying to turn people into math nerds and like celebrate their inner nerd, because that's what I'm all about.
I'm all about that too. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well, I mean, he's just about panpsychism, but like I think the problem with panpsychism again is saying, I don't really think we are the God. We are the creator. We are the energy that is the. I think that's like the relationship difference. There is the difference between space-time arrangements of matter and energy itself, right? So energy itself doesn't have all those rules that we have and obligations that we have, right?
No. I mean, I don't understand.
So like panpsychism would suggest that like we are the energy, like we are God essentially, right?
That's not my interpretation
Okay,
of panpsychism.
what's your interpretation? Define it, please.
My understanding of panpsychism is that the fundamental building blocks of reality have a mind. So electrons have a mind, protons have a mind, and we have a mind because we're the summation of building blocks that have mind.
Yeah, you know,
Right.
that's absolutely. I think that's absolutely. Then I do agree.
Okay.
I think gnosis, mind, sentience, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, even at a monadical level, you know, everything has, because that I think that's a very spiritual list. I believe, of course, this idea that there's God in everything, right? So everything is arranged. All the matter is got the energy in it already, and so if that energy is divine or divinely divine principles are going to emerge in physical form because of that, right? And that explains the complexity of sentience.
Yeah.
So sure, okay.
Well, I think it's our job to have this conversation almost from different standpoints and toss these ideas back and forth because they're not familiar to a lot of the audience members. And I think what you're saying is I almost heard you saying that like the math and the numbers is like our creation, and because it's more perfect than we are, then if God can make us, we must be better than God in this, heresy because we made math. And in reality, the idea that math is there as part of an echo going from the beginning to the end of time, the most stable shapes, the platonic solids, these kind of sacred geometries resonate forward and backwards, if that's even a useful way to look at the 11-dimensional universe. But as far as math goes, it's like the best expression of it distilled down is that we are the instrument that the universe made to perceive itself, that would not only notice the patterns, but appreciate the improbability that they would exist, let alone be observed and understood and then discussed. And I think that's an underappreciated miracle of, people get caught up in what's the right answer or what do you believe in or what are you trying to put forward. And so kind of on the same wavelength here, Xirtus, you brought up the 3 brown, 1 blue, or is it three blue, 1 brown? Seth, have you heard of this?
No, I don't think so.
He's a creator that I got into a while ago, and I could follow his first 50 videos in terms of kind of going back through some of the finer points that weren't covered in the mathematics classes I took up, through college. But eventually he was going over my head, and it was a real challenge. It was like picking up the magazine Scientific American, and instead of picking the articles I understand, picking the ones I don't, and really trying to lean into those. And so here's an iterative function where this goes all the way back down to 1 term. So it starts off as one simple integral, and I've got a couple shots pulled up. I don't know if I'm sharing it properly.
But this is yeah.
So the value of the function always comes out to pi, like for the first 9 iterations, okay? And then the next one that it comes out to, you would expect it either to break the symmetry or the iterative nature of this recursive, I don't know if it's an algorithm or integral. So let's see, sharing screen, present, because then there's an answer for this one. Maybe I can just pick a different. Anyways, the number comes out to, I'll just read it out loud here. It's like 0.0004. Obviously, screen share isn't working out, but it's some infinitesimally small number. It's like 8 zeros. Oh yeah, so it's 0.0000. It's like 8 or 9 zeros and then 462. And so he does go on to explain at the end of this video how it works and why the mathematical nuance is there. But it's one of these things that you almost have to go back and watch it in order to hold it in your mind. And, if I were studying for a test, go ahead. I don't mean to come on and
just this video here.
What you're describing, it sounds like we do need to watch it. It sounds relevant to this.
Yeah, 3 blue, 1 brown. Great channel. He's got a lot of amazing research on prisms and, he's a pretty great math guy. I like him.
It's the video. It is, if you sort it by date, which one is it? Yeah. And it's about a third of the way into it. But yeah, so you see this equation just keeps growing. And for some reason, the way that the numbers are stacking in there, when you look at it, it might have something to do with, the way 3, 6, 9s end up repeating and adding the numbers into the iteration
Right. Set pi to
In a certain
0, of
order.
course. And what happens
ba-
when you set pi to 0? Then you get sine of not quite 10, which is funny. Sine of x over x is not quite 10. So it's
so-
just no matter what you do, you're
Seth,
going to find approximation.
Just so you know that you have a fellow math nerd who, again, will just sit there. There's an equation called, I think it's Euler's equation, where it's e to the pi I, which is an imaginary number, minus 1 equals 0. So you have five terms in
Yeah.
there. And it's like the five all-stars of if you were going to try to get a 4-year-old interested in math and the complex parts. Like, okay, there's this concept 0 and 1 and pi and e, the natural logarithm. You'll learn that when you're older. It's like a...
But like,
then
so you set pi to 0, and then so you try doing it with infinity. So you do like infinity as above, so below, right? And so
that's the key part, that it's a fractal that contains infinity, so that you're going to have an integer that is infinity to
Then
be
you'll get pi.
able to like swap out with it to have an equivalence, right?
yeah, but because
Like-
there's no way to have 0 technically, because 0 requires there to be something to exist. It just seems like all of these things continually emphasize and infer God or whatever that is, right? Atheist God.
Well, usually the geometry and the Cartesian two-dimensional, not three-dimensional grid is used to show why the approximation of calculus that you're using is either just above or just below the actual true value if you do the true integer. And so what's interesting here, though, is by doing the true integer, you still end up with a curve that
Yeah.
overlaps in a certain way that somehow explains that infinitesimal. See, it matches up for the first, like, if you go back 5 seconds, it was like the first 9 digits on the left match up, and then just a little bit farther to the right. Sounds like we're trying to.
Right here.
Think there you go.
Yeah.
That's the Goldilocks moment right there. So there are a bunch of digits on the right there that don't match, but they're a lot smaller than the ones on the left. And before that, the numbers matched up exactly. And
So it's reaching a level of highest complexity, and then it seems to then decrease afterwards, is what you're showing.
right, and
No,
usually
it's not losing in complexity. What it is sorry, I'm yelling. It's that reality. Okay, if you were to go into a field and you were to grab I've done this in metaphor before. Like, you go into a field and you look at a single tree in the orchard, right? And in that single tree, you measure just the one branch, and you see how long that branch is, and you see how many branches there are, and you see how many apples are on that tree. From that, you can make a really decent, not perfect, but decent approximation of how big that field is, how many trees are in that field, how many apples will be on the other trees, right? And this is so there are ways of using Mandelbrot math, living math equations that will eventually more or less and so what's interesting about that is, like, no matter what you do, right, you can't avoid certain things happening. There are destinial things that are happening around you because everything is made up of math, of these subatomic particles that are going. You can make all kinds of choices. You can affect the world in subtle ways. You can make things better.
Essentially, that we did not create math. Math is like woven into part of our own creation.
But
and
people get
existence.
really upset because they'll say, okay, well, like, why doesn't my formula work perfectly? And it's because, people do have a certain... I think it's interesting that the word that they use for the wages of cosine are death. Come on. Sine, that's always...
my brother, when we were playing ping pong and he would miss hit the ball, he would always go, stop dividing by 0. And, like, he wasn't a great math student, but that was, like, his one good math
Your
joke.
brother's
And
a dick. That's great.
I tried to explain to him that didn't make sense. That's not what it's doing. But for all I know.
The wages of sine are death. I don't know.
So my conclusion is probably different from yours at the bottom of this
Where's
investigation.
your thing? I can't even pull it back up now?
Yeah, I stopped sharing it. I can share it again.
That never happens.
Sorry,
to me.
I rant a lot and have
We don't
ADHD.
need we only made it halfway through.
Yeah.
That's presentation. We still got
Just
the
because of
other half.
ADHD
No, I didn't mean to
doesn't mean
steal the thunder. Yeah.
No, we're almost done. Basically, I started getting into the fractal problem because this concept of, like, infinitely incrementing your pixels, it started to make me think of fractals and fractal dimensions. How we're in order to get the perfect circle, you have to zoom in infinitely to fill up that perfect curvature. And so the problem with this is ontologically, right? Ontology, the study of existence, you know, the fundamental building blocks of ontology. We've got like atoms, we've got quantum stuff. The problem is, if you want to build the perfect circle in reality, I'm starting to think it's impossible, because in order to have a perfect circle, you have to have a perfect curvature at every level of zoom, right? And so that means you zoom in, you get smaller and smaller, you get down to the chemicals, you're trying to build a perfect circle in chemicals, you go smaller to the atoms. Like, even an atom is not going to build a perfect circle. You have to zoom in past that layer of resolution. Have to go into the quantum layer. None of these materials are stable, they're chaotic, they're bulky.
It's the
They've got
opposite of the glass ceiling. So the glass ceiling in like the economy, you can't go above it, but Planck's length is kind of the glass.
I would argue like valence. I would argue sp2 orbitals, and I would argue most orbitals would be orbitals follow the laws of entropy in pi. Orbitals are usually, pretty. Orbitals make fields because they're symmetrical.
So the problem is pi is it's like a perfect ideal, and it's an infinitely perfect ideal, and you can't have a perfect pi shaped curve unless you have infinite levels of detail. And I think
have you measured it yourself?
No.
See, this is one of these things where I tend to bring a very skeptical mindset to the table. And I've never seen the curve of the Earth. And the idea is that even if I was up as high as the space station, you're not mathematically far enough away from the Earth. But so now if we take that back down to ground level thinking, though, I like what you're saying. I remember I was a big sci-fi fan growing up, and when there's an explosion in outer space, that's one of the closest things you can get to a perfect circle. But so are we defining a circle as a boundary condition and then not the surface area in between? Because then even at that point, there's no such thing as an infinitesimally thin line. As you said, you get down to the quantum and the Planck, and there's still something.
Exactly.
In philosophy, the idea is in our mind, you conceive of something, and it achieves a certain type of perfection that as soon as you try to put it in words or thoughts even, it is downgraded. And it's downgraded to thoughts and then downgraded to words. And not that it was perfect, but you're moving away from that as soon as...
Exactly.
So that's why these idea of thought forms and memes that a complex equation that represents a set of thinking.
I can't believe Disney's gonna make X-Files. Keep going.
Yeah. So basically, my conclusion is along those lines. There's no such thing as a perfect circle in nature because it's impossible to instantiate that perfect curvature because it's an infinite level of detail to instantiate.
Well, it exists, right? But there's no boundary conditions around it. In theory, there's perfect circles everywhere, right?
I think it's so. The thing is, like,
I'm just trying to.
So what you're. So here's the thing that you're saying though. So what it is that
doesn't a
protractor
draw a perfect circle every time?
You said a protractor?
No, it doesn't. But
that was the rest of the thoughts that I was trying to get out of it.
Let me say though, I'm gonna forget it now. Darn it!
Yeah. It was probably going to be profound.
It was going to be so good. No,
question I had that I didn't even realize I had.
So here's how it goes. I just need a second. So the thing is, what you're saying is in nature, nothing is able to perfectly produce the divine function and principle that you're asking for, which is this orbital. This orbital that pi is telling us to do. It's nothing's doing it perfectly in nature, but they're all trying to do this perfect thing, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So yeah, like my way of understanding why pi occurs in nature is flipping it backwards and basically thinking of like there's a generator function, which is, remember this basal problem, which is we're just infinitely pushing the pixels outwards. So if you've got these inherent forces in nature, these forces are pushing outwards. So it's like push one unit of force, push outwards, push outwards, push outwards. And if you're pushing outwards in all directions, you're going to approximate pi, but you're never going to instantiate it.
Dude, Fart from Rick and Morty So if you ever watch Rick and Morty, there's this like fart
The cloud of consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah. So, they think our universe is evil because people and places and things, right? Like it should be just this singularity that is able. So
Well, what's funny is the cloud looking out thinks the world is evil, but they don't kill the cloud because they're like, how bad could it be? It's a glowing cloud of light and orbs and colors. And
no,
it turns
Rick
out
knows.
that it's like
It's just
uber
only
powerful
Morty's that naive, and like Rick lets him go through it to learn it because he knows it happens. But I mean, here's the thing: that is this idea, like you're saying, God is this perfect singularity, and then all of a sudden the choice is made for things to assemble themselves, choose to assemble themselves as they want, but they're coming out from this Big Bang like experience, because like it seems like if God spoke and said let there be light or anything at all, that like something as insane as all of everything happening that kind of actually makes sense, like just that idea, like that profound. But even just sonoluminescence, this idea that friction and vibrations and subatomic string theory, like someone said earlier that they thought
it bridges
that
the gap
spaghetti
between
monster,
vibration and emission. Yeah.
yeah, the Boy Scouts spaghetti monster, the flying spaghetti monster, is subatomic string theory.
No. There are squid and octopus that jump out of the water and soar for 10 feet. So when they were like, it
real
was
life,
really
it's
stormy,
true.
they would actually fall. So imagine you had never seen an octopus, you had caught fish your whole life. You just never, and then all of a sudden, literally, it rains a spaghetti monster on your head, and you're like, what's that?
Yeah, but vibrations existing is interesting, and if nothing was vibrating and everything was completely still and everything, then
Absolute
everything
zero.
would be at absolute zero. Exactly.
But at
So I think-
absolute zero, everything's superconductive, right?
But this is like the
so
ideal
it
gas law.
absolutely-
These are things that exist as concepts, and they don't exist in reality. So by defining God as an infinitesimally dense source of anything, you're
I
almost
like this
defining him
name,
out of existence,
thought.
unless you're saying he's just short of that.
So yeah, that's kind of my point. Is it's like I have no problem with humans trying to become more like what they think God is, because it's still nothing compared to the whole thing. And so every religion that seems like it's
God
got
is
anyone like
both
Vaishnavism.
everything and nothing simultaneously, right?
Oh, I'm going on pull
You
my
just got to
God.
check the
that's
wax
the
on your
whole
wings.
thing,
It's
God.
probably melting. If you're starting to equate your, that's where you can mix
I'm
the
really
pagan
glad.
myths
You know what?
into the Christian.
You're such a mensch. I'm glad you brought that up for a couple reasons. So I don't know where I had to go to find it now. Bard. I think I had it here. Walensky. So do you guys ever read Walensky, Quantum Psychology, or like The Way of the Human in Quantum Psychology? Because it's a really important book. Hold on
There's
a
a
second.
steakhouse here that's called Smith and Walensky, but that's the only time I've heard that last name. So.
Yo, and he's back.
I'm
Yeah,
ex-
say ahead.
I'm ex- I'm extremely skeptical of everything quantum. When
Really?
you try to connect what? Me? No.
Andreas, you go on.
So it's healthy to be skeptical. And in reality, your skepticism is correct, but it's such a useful model for understanding and describing what is reproducible empirical science when it comes down to the periodic table. And so without the periodic table as an additional artifice, that idea of quantum energies is so what it does apply to is if you're sending and receiving radio waves with a passive listening device and you're not selecting which frequencies, you're just kind of listening 360 and then spitting it all out in one direction. And so when we're reading these old texts that have been translated, the words and the structure of it are close enough that either it was a purposeful kind of mistelling of a story or a layering of an allegorical explanation of something. Because old history used to all be allegorical history. And then at some point it shifted to more literal recording of events. And then you can extract meaning and lessons from those events. But there was a time where, again, like Julius Caesar, the C-section, the way it's instantiated in our history textbooks is that she either died when he was born or lived to 80. And so we know she didn't have a C-section because otherwise she would have died at birth, because at that time, that's what it meant. And we're still not at the place where we're revisiting these things and reinterpreting them now with modern wisdom. So there's a bunch of examples of that I've come across lately that are interesting to share to see if they're interesting to other people.
I have no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
with
I think
any
you were
of
still
that.
midstream, but good.
What
Okay,
I wanted,
Andreas
what I
didn't
wanted
pass
to,
out.
what I wanted to say was about the way of the human. So basically, Stephen Walensky, a friend of mine, Roberta Pacino, Al Pacino's sister, gave me this book. It changed my life. I say everyone needs to read this book. And one of the things about it, first off, when it says quantum doesn't mean what you think it does necessarily, especially from like a
Like
90s
the
connotation.
definition of quantum isn't what it's something over time,
So let's
information over.
let's let's let's
It's
think of
misleading to the average
yeah
layman.
think of like the synthesis of the idea of quantitative, and so you're saying, all right, we can look at things as a pie. Again, this is quantitative. We're looking at it as a pie, and we can break it down into pieces. And so from there, we might decide that there are gluons, and we might decide there aren't. But as time went on, we were able to do kind of these experiments. And you looked at that thing where we showed you pie with these giant blocks and a small block, and it does collisions. What we're finding is to do these kinds of experiments, which is why CERN is this giant thing. It's really ironic because CERN is this huge thing, so it can do these tiny little things. Why does it have to be so big to be so small? Because you need so much energy at that level in order to make these super fast distances, these tiny little distances to travail. So when we're making these experiments, like, we have to start to do this as quantitatively.
Well,
So
in the
quantum
proton, you're accelerating actual matter and pieces of the nucleus around the linear accelerator that's been turned into a nonlinear accelerator because it's a loop. But the reason it actually has to have distance to pick up speed, whereas photons are kind of, if you imagine a waterfall that has some thickness and you have a rocket that with a propellant on the back, it's going a certain speed. Let's say it's reached its kind of constant velocity. When it enters the water, it's going to slow down, and then when it leaves the water, it's going to speed up again. But there's still a phase when it's entering the water where there's this transition speed. And because we're going back and forth when observing these reactions between physical vibration and then kind of a more electrochemical stimulation, and this is kind of the nature of the photoelectric effect, or
what was the Greek myth you brought up earlier? Oh yeah, like the wings of
Icarus.
yeah, Icarus.
There's
All right,
Icarus and
well,
Daedalus.
remind me, because we're getting to that point. So the whole reason I brought that up wasn't to do with quantum, but because you brought it up, quantum therefore is tied to meta. So the idea of meta, we think of these like meta bros. That's not what that means either. It's not like the metaphysic meta universe. It's that if there's a quantitative perspective, then there has to be a meta, a whole, right? So there's a whole, and then there's also beyond the whole, right? So numbers have to do with quantitative division and fractions, and also with meta wholes, which are like numbers of numbers, right? So we these ideas are not new, and like, so when people think these are just radical new age hippy dippy ideas, there are people that have latched onto those things because, of course, the frontier psychology or ideology is to take these newest ideas and to run with them, and there will be many people that don't understand what they mean anyway.
And then someone comes out of the other side of the world of a religion that hasn't been studied or practiced in 6,000 years outside of like this small patch of land, and they're going, yeah, no, your scientific principle that you're claiming, again, it's like that's exactly,
Yeah, it's like Marxism to Ubuntu.
and there's a parallel there. And either we're trying to still recover the knowledge that was passed on as allegorical history, because it was like the matzah didn't have time to rise, and they had to pass on everything, and instead of breaking them all up into students into camps and specializations, it was like a general ed approach. And so, because I'm actually not sure, when it comes to the human species, are we smarter as quantized individual units, or does our intelligence emerge only, not even
well, it's both
throughout
bro.
one space of time, but it's like the depth of time, and somehow
it's both. Like, everything is everything. That's the thing. It's quantitative and it's meta. So first you look at yourself, then you look at the community, and you see yourself in civilization's history, and you have to tie the macrocosm into the microcosm and align them with what you're eating and your
that usually makes my
ecosystem.
system crash.
But yeah, of course. And then, so the other thing is, then you have to imagine, like, so the thing that I learned that was really important, and that was one reason I got this book, was because of storytelling, was that you look at a story, and what it is like, when you write a story, you've got like 12 characters or 6 characters that matter. Those are just aspects of yourself, right? And so often you'll see like The Office, TV show, and people will, and this has been a big thing I've been pushing against, people be like, oh, I'm like that character, or you're like that character, or I, in the best world, in the best light, like you could be like in this mundane world, this is the most romantic version of that mundane character, so you could be that. And so then you get typecast into your own who you are. And so what you should be doing is looking at it meta, and you're saying, okay, these quantum persons are all part of the meta enneagram that is this office, that is a superorganism.
Is
right?
it related to the concept of zeitgeist as well? Meta is kind of adjacent.
Of course, yeah. The Geist is also, I think, if you're talking about the spirit of well, elaborate. Do you mean it like God's breath, or do you mean it like the emerging panpsychic consciousness of this individual?
Well, so it's like I'm experiencing a series of days where I'm doing research that I'm leaning into my ADD thinking and just hopping around the internet and
did you
able
know
to dive into
right now
databases.
In some places in the world, we're supposed to do something about that here, just for everybody. Okay, sorry.
But so meta and zeitgeist. So that series of mathematical progressions of the not the integrals, not integers. It's when it breaks the paradigm. That's the new meta. Is assuming, marching on like our ancestors did. We keep building algorithm bigger and bigger, kind of pretending that we're on this linear. But then we get to a point where all the rules all of a sudden don't apply anymore, and then we don't know if they're going to go back to applying in the future or otherwise. So for meta versus zeitgeist, I mean, right now, to finish the idea of being able to go into a web browser, everyone right now, if you have the wherewithal and the time and the energy to dive into 12 different wormholes in a day, in the past, you would have to go to the basement of a Vatican-type library, and there was a giant wheel, and you would put your book on there, and it was like a carousel, and you could hold it open to one page. And so instead of switching between web browsers, you literally spin this giant wheel, and it's just not as efficient. And you can't go swap out volume 7 of this treatise for 12 in 3 seconds. And when it takes a second and a half instead of a half a second for a 40-page PDF to download, it feels like, oh, I can't. I'm being distracted now. I just lost my train of thought. When in reality, at no time in history, from what I understand, or at least in our is it a two-way street where you can kind of ask exactly the right questions you're looking for and dive in. It's not that every university database is linked and available, but building an understanding of what are alpha particles, beta particles, neutrinos, quarks, all that stuff, and then also going into like 15 different Renaissance paintings and the technique they have, and difference between intaglio and different coins, and then trying to figure out Chile. This is like a old Florida moment, but Chile, the country, Achilles. It's like long and thin and really strong, and it lasts a long time and doesn't break. And so, what's evidence that we used to be ancient? Oh, what's it called? There's no other explanation as to why it's called that.
The story. So with Walensky's quantum psychology, you look at stories from the perspective.
The answer is that's so meta, right? So thank you for making that song, because I put these things forward, and it's like wow, or it's like mind blown. No, it's just there's so many of them now. It's like it is the meta, it is the zeitgeist that you're just going to find these things that.
Well, you think about this idea of all these characters are one person's story, right? Their their struggle, their existence, and so. In Icarus, which is an interesting one, we look at it like it's a story. Is it the story of Icarus, or is it the story of Daedalus, or is it the story of who's Icarus's who is Icarus is the son who dies, right?
Yeah.
Who's his nephew?
Daedalus or no? That's his father.
Hold on.
Well, so Seth, quickly, was the research you're presenting in Gesundheit, by the way?
Perdix.
But was that stuff that you've compiled yourself, or is it just stuff that you've studied enough to be able to?
The mathematical blog. That
Well,
was
I
just.
kind of hopped in halfway, and it seemed like you were
Oh yeah.
driving
That was.
towards.
Yeah. Basically, Andreas sparked this curiosity in me, and for 2 days, I kind of did a little investigation into this, and then I wrote down, my logical deductions as I went through this little journey.
Yeah, the first way
That's
you can test, not if you've mastered the knowledge, but if gained familiarity with it, is you try to explain it. And I think this is a nice format where it doesn't have to make sense the first time.
came to live with Daedalus, and Daedalus his son Icarus, and Perdix was beautiful and smart, and Daedalus was an inventor, and he made like flying toys and things like that. And he got so sick of his nephew, he threw his nephew off the roof of his building, which is like a part of the story I don't think everyone hears that much for some reason. I don't know if you've heard that part, but like that seems important. And so Daedalus and his
God
son
was going to come down and say, no, throw an ant. What was it like with Abraham? Throw a sheep.
No, he was
off
just
the roof.
jealous. He's just jealous because his son was an
But the
idiot.
cell phone
like,
signal
because
got blocked,
Icarus wasn't smart, and Icarus was really like hyper, and he just was like he didn't do what he was supposed to do, and it just annoyed him. So
the only way you can wax that would be that temperature resistant is if you were a pottery worker.
we didn't get to the wax yet. We didn't get to the wax yet. So Daedalus and Icarus have to leave because now Perdix is dead, and so that's not good. So Daedalus ends up leaving, and he ends up like selling as automata to a king. The king is it King Minos, right?
Midas, the golden touch.
No, not that
Minos.
one.
I think Minos.
King Minos. Yeah, King Minos. So King Minos, and so Minos is interesting. Minos is interesting because he's the king, but he's also got a minotaur, right? And he's got a labyrinth he's built by Daedalus because he's got this.
See, this is where when you stepped out for a second, we were talking about how at a certain point history switched from being allegorical to kind of real-time recording, and then you can interpret
but hold on. Here's
the labyrinth with the wire is an antenna, and he needed to get the message, so he needed to string out the antenna because you got like one system, and if you leave it on receive and then there's a solar flare, it blows out your system if you don't have the right kind of fuses built in.
Minos believed that the god would accept a substitute sacrifice. To punish Minos, Poseidon made Minos' wife Pasiphae fall in love with a bull. Pasiphae had the craftsman Daedalus fashion a hollow wooden cow, which she climbed in to mate with the bull. She then bore Asturias, the Minotaur. Okay? So, I mean, I'm telling you this for some reasons. I swear. This is all adding up to a thing.
Was that Bible? No,
because this is a great movie, right? Like all these characters, they're very interesting characters. Like it's not just about Icarus. Like I haven't even told you about him. Like I told you he's kind of annoying.
Could the Minotaur be a homunculus?
Well, hold on, because you're going to start thinking to yourself, like, am I the Minotaur or are you the Minotaur? And the real answer is we're all the Minotaur, and we're all Minos, and we're all Icarus, and we're all of the characters.
It's actually a story about Jake Paul's father. They were doing a kissing game, and instead of Jake being there to kiss the contestant, his dad went in, and everyone's like, "You just kissed me." You're like 20 years
every
old.
Story in Greek psychology and Greek mythology, at least eventually, evolved to be because if you're telling a story, like you're a kid hearing it about the child, but you're also an adult hearing it eventually, and so you become all the characters in the story at some point in your life. So your lifetime in its meta includes states that are adding up into, and so all of these stories matter, which is one of the reasons I think, Seth, you want to make mythologies, because mythologies have that value to them. So here's the thing with this story, right? Because what you're doing, if you're saying one is the one and one's the other, instead of realizing that it's all this valence, it's all this orbital that's happening, you've got the king who has tried to be the most ferocious he can be to be the king. He had to defeat his brothers to do it, right? And he had to like trick the gods to do it. He had to be the most cunning. Like Joe Biden had to be worse than Trump kind of thing. Don't taste me, bro. But to do that, then also he had to be what a king is, which is the benevolent ruler. So he had to suppress his inner beast. Okay, and so his inner beast comes out as his child, the Minotaur. Seriously, so the Minotaur is now this controlled rage, and he actually it's now you've got Daedalus, and Daedalus is kind of this like Fight Club projection of BurnEye showing numbers here. What are these numbers about, Bernie?
I never learned to count that high.
Well,
apparently 1 has 1 angle, 2 has 2 angles, 3 has 3 angles, 4 has 4, 5 has 5, 6 has 7 is 7. 8 is 8. 9 is 9. 0 has 0.
And there would have
Nice.
been a time where someone was like, "How did you memorize the numbers without that?" You know.
So minus son is the minus son is the Minotaur, and but he's also Daedalus. Everyone is the Minotaur. Everyone is minus. Everyone's also Daedalus. Daedalus is this character who is the inventor who has done this horrible thing and is now running from himself and is trying to protect his son, which he doesn't even like his son, but it's his son, right? So he's doing his best, and his son is a reflection of his own inadequacies and imperfection, right? But he's got him, and he builds him the labyrinth. And he's also, by the way, the guy who built the labyrinth, the guy who got the wife the bull suit. Let's not forget, like, it's Daedalus who created this problem as well as created this solution. So it's like the things that the king is using to help himself are things that are hurting himself, and he's also his own problem. All right, so now Daedalus is in trouble because of, obviously, and they have to leave, and because they're going to be stuck working for the king until they're killed. So they create these wingsuits, and yeah, now is a good time to talk about the wax, but just the idea of the god is the sun, Hellenism, and this idea of hell being, fiery sun. You're going to the sun, and it's the inner sun, and hell is good versus hell is bad to the, Pauline Christians or whatever, Hellenism, right? Like, so this idea that getting to be at the sun is bad is a very Christian notion. Like, to a Hellenist, this is Icarus becoming like the sun, like the gods, right? And as he gets closer to the gods, his wings melt. But
well,
it's
in a
not just
square
his
space, you
wings
can
that
find
melt.
the center. You can find it's called the moment of inertia. It's like if you were going to lift it up by one point from underneath it, no matter how, you can mathematically calculate where that's going to be. Now, a maze actually continues to reorient you. So the idea of it being almost like enrichment, and if you're by putting both them in the labyrinth, what is the Alex Jonesian, the open air prison that we are, techno prison that we're all being forced to, 15-minute walking
Right. The
city or whatever
Minotaur
it's called.
it's like Jefferson saying, like, learn to count to 20 or to 100 before you duel, right? The Minotaur is in this labyrinth to keep him from being able to be used. The labyrinth is the amount of time it takes before you
to literally roll out your
yeah.
antenna. You understand that it literally, you're running a wire. It's described as a metallic wire, and you're running it in the shape of a fractal, because potentially it's not a maze. The labyrinth was kind of a regular repeating shape. And so as long as you did that, and that's how you would put out your antenna. Instead of putting it up on the roof for a certain frequency, it would be set up. And that way the people setting it up would never know what it was hooked up to. You would tell them it's a story. They're reenacting like the Passover ritual where you go scoop the crumbs out of the corner once a year, and it may be so that
who does
get ergot poison.
Who loves the Minotaur? The daughter, Ariadne, right? Ariadne is in love with the Minotaur and is soothing the beast. It's the Beauty and the Beast myth, right? So then you've got the daughter that is trying to fix the father's problems, but also, like, the father is God, right? And then the mother nature. I mean, so all of these levels to the story.
Why is it a beast? It's a beast because it's half human, and we feel sorry for it because it's not fully human. But what we're really seeing is that it's a beast because it's half human, whereas a cow and a bull, you can get along with those just fine.
The beast aspect is like the king's personal primal, his primal nature, right? Which he's used, and now he's learned how to lock up.
Or isn't a homunculus?
But it's what his wife loved, and it's what this
well, homunculus implies that you grew it in a jar,
to solve.
You put it back in.
But again, so the final thing of this point is that we as Occidental Christian influenced people think of Icarus as failing and the suffering here of his death, when we should understand this is his trans metamorphosis, because he gets to the point where he loses his wing. He's gotten so close to the sun, he loses his wings, and one could say he loses his body in that process. So really, Icarus has finally solved the problems of Daedalus and of all the characters in the story, because he becomes universal.
And it's the fallacy of trying to reach God by building something that you don't have. If there were real wings, they wouldn't have melted, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's essentially like Jesus dying for our sins. He died for His
No,
family's
in a weird way, you get into some Neoplatonic thought there because Chardinianism talks about Christ evolution, and I think again, like we look at the pure application of pure mathematics, the application of pure mathematics to natural sciences, and the idea of a perfect person fits really nicely into transhumanism, into evolution, into physics. This idea that we get to a point where something like a Christ emerges actually is a great idea for evolution, and so it's very tempting
It's
to
anti-Hermann Hessian, where it's about
Seth,
the
go ahead.
destination and the journey.
Oh yeah, sorry, Seth also.
Please,
Yeah.
please, yeah.
But Stefan too. I love you both.
So to
This is
tie
not my
this
area.
to tie this back to pi, this concept of the perfect man, is it as elusive as the concept of the perfect pie?
Yeah, absolutely. There you go.
Well, Vitruvius
There you
is the
go.
oldest, and so the idealized human, the Da Vinci, the guy in the circle, and how it's like how does the moon perfectly cover up the sun for an eclipse? It seems like there's some magic built in, but it is built on the fallacy because the better basketball players actually have like a 6'8" wingspan if they're 6'4".
It's a freaking
Or it's like-
atom. That's the thing about the Vitruvian man. Is you're literally
And
just
to
looking
say
at an
that's
atom, right?
ideal, no, that's like average-ish, but
When people started to realize, because you're saying man is in the image of God, and like people constantly need to start working on understanding that you're using your symbols, so you're looking at it with what is yourself, but you're going to need to look at all of your experience and all of humanity's experiences for all of history in order to have even an approximation of the shadow of the thing that it's, in the husk of, right? In the reflection of.
see, to me, that image reminds me of what it would look like if you were trying to understand.
They cut him off. It was too good. Sorry, Stefan, you got cut off by the agencies. They don't want you to say it. Non-integer base of numeration. Beta expansion. He'll be back. Apollo's interesting. Pythagoras, they said, was the son of Apollo, right? So I find Apollo to be kind of interesting. Apollo shoots the arrow. I think of Zeno's paradox. You know Zeno's paradox?
Maybe. Which one is
Zeno's
this?
paradox is this idea, like, if I shoot an arrow, right, and in order for that arrow to go, I don't know if this is the same picture, but let's just use it, to go 100% of the distance, first it would seem it would have to go half the distance, right? But for then it to go from half of the distance, the rest of the 100%, it would first have to, one would think, go half of that, which would be 25% of that. And, then you can go 12.5%. And then, but the thing is, you start to approximate, you realize by going halves, you can never get to zero. So Zeno's paradox is that you can never actually hit a target because you can never actually reach zero with division.
Basically, the idea that there's an infinite amount of distance between two objects.
Like theoretical distance, right? And that just also that mathematically, like there's a, you would never get to zero.
Between string theory and reality. Reality, I can actually shoot something with a bow because it is a finite distance, and in
Well, this isn't
theoretical
string theory. This is ancient Greek philosophy, math, and
well,
logic.
infinite theory, right?
But it's a paradox. And these are logical paradoxes from thousands of years ago. They're like, well, from what we understand about math, then why is it possible that you can solve for Zeno's paradox? Why is it possible to go
It has
100%?
to do more with the sound.
Andreas, do you think that so you're familiar with 0.9 infinitely repeating is equivalent to 1, right?
Right.
Yep.
Do you think that that's
Because
relevant?
of infinity.
Do you think that's relevant here?
Yeah, everything so far that we've shown works by solving as infinity. If you replace 0 with infinity, then you're able to do it. Because if you can do it infinitely, then infinitely would mean that, of course, you can get
So
to
you
0.
cannot connect two infinites. You cannot connect two infinites together. But there's always like the smaller infinite going out and the larger infinite going in, and you can't experience both.
Fractals make it really hard to have fractals make it really hard to have like a level of simplicity. Like I think that's like the interesting thing. And so when we look at chaos, then chaos no longer is dissidence. Chaos is just really complex and perhaps irrational, but therefore divine numbers. So every single time it seems to come to further complexity, not lesser complexity or to dissonance.
So to tie this all the way back to the very beginning, my mathematical exploration of pi led me to the conclusion that pi doesn't exist in nature, and therefore the base reality is simple. And so maybe you're rejecting that conclusion.
I feel like I was like agreeing with you, and then wait, what is that the answer? Because if in nature we can't even reach pi, right? Then it proves that nature in reality is more simple than these divine principles, right? So it seems like these divine principles, therefore, are proven to be far more complex than anything we've evolved to achieve. But we've been trying.
My conclusion is that reality isn't based on these divine principles.
But everything is. They're just not quite perfect. Like they're trying so damned hard. Well, atoms are trying so hard to have perfect covalent bonds. sp2 orbitals prove it.
My explanation is the basal problem. The basal problem emerges into pi. It imperfectly emerges into pi. And so if reality is based on the basal problem, then it's not based on pi. It's based on a function that approximates pi.
I think that's nuanced, but it's still then that says that it's trying to approximate pi. Everything's trying to approximate pi because pi is the ideal.
So it's a very simple function.
That's within the mathematical dimension. Within the geometric dimension, it exists in harmony in nature as a geometry, as a shape, as opposed to numbers.
So my conclusion is that a perfect pi circle does not exist in nature. It's only the approximations because
I think perfect pi circles do exist in nature if you look at electrons or photons, like photon radius or something. I mean, you can measure it. You can get perfect.
No, I see what you're saying though. Like, how many drops of waters are perfect spheres? It's like there's never a perfect one sort of thing because there's constantly infinite small amounts of forces acting
I would say I think because of
different.
the amount of frequency, like if you could, I mean it depends. I mean, okay, I don't know. It's hard to argue that. I would say with the amount of frequency that would make it perfect. I get that you could say that it's not, but obviously it is because it's reality and it works.
Well,
it's the only way it works. Like gluons have to come in threes. It's just what it is,
The reason why pi is impossible in nature is because it requires an infinite amount of detail at every infinite layer of zoom, and that's incoherent metaphysically.
I think it's just not everything wants to synchronize. I mean, not everything wants to be the same thing, and so
you're the first person to measure it, though. You say it doesn't exist in reality, but you can measure it if you have really precise tools and a good system. I think to 20 places. So while I agree, because even with math, you can't get there because there is no there. It's an irrational number. It keeps repeating, or it doesn't repeat. So.
Wouldn't you say sine waves are perfect though? I don't agree. I just feel like in certain circumstances we can prove wave functions are real, and particles are creating dissidence, which are fudging the numbers slightly, but not enough to really matter. Right? It seems like at the end of the day, if I pulled out oscilloscope
and finite.
If I pull out an oscilloscope, how imperfect is an oscilloscope going to be? It's dependent on a crystal, If
Eric Weinstein's artificial intelligence just saw that spiraling diagram you played and had a little mental happy time.
So if you're getting a frequency from a photon, well, how is that working? Well, there's an internal dynamic within the photon. The photon there's repulsion, attraction, and it's oscillating, and there's forces that are creating this frequency, and well, how do those forces work? Is there an infinite amount of detail in this force, or is there a finite amount of detail in that force? How would how do you even exist with an infinite amount of detail? It's kind of an incoherent ask.
It's no, because again, you're talking because of irrational numbers, bro. Because with the irrational numbers, you can arrange 17 subatomic particles in so many various ways, you know. And so the way that they function, there's only so
Called
many ways that are
superposition, right?
possible. Yeah, and then
And
of
that's the
course,
whole. It doesn't make sense inherently to our understanding of the three-dimensional world we live in, or even really the four-dimensional. But superposition and the idea that when they teach you orbitals at first, and you're learning about atoms, you learn about Bohr's model, and it's like, you know, it looks like the solar system, and you're like, that's so cool. It looks just like the solar system. I can't believe that. But then when you learn more, like there's inner orbitals, outer orbitals, there's LP, and then you represent one atom or a molecule, and it's like a string of 56 digits with like sub numbers on each one, and that represents the valence electrons. And I learned that when I was in ninth grade, and remember
Right.
like holding it all in my brain. And then,
yeah, but the problem with the Bohr's model is the same problem with most wave functions is they show you in this weird like Pac-Man 2D plane instead of showing you like, you know, a 3D atomic.
but if you taught me as an eighth grader about the orbitals, I wouldn't have had the foundation to believe the complexity of the math or understand why it was important.
There we go. Here we go. Here's a little bit more realistic. And even then, this is a problem because they're always showing you these balls, and it's not balls really, but we kind of because those balls are similar to this thing. Like if you look at this thing far enough away, you think, well, these are things spinning around each other as well. So I mean, it's a lot more. I mean, what I find interesting is like this is a far more approachable. Like when people say like space is fake or anything, space looks the way they model space is based on this. And this is real. Like I can experience this, I can measure this, and I can interact with this. So I mean, I don't know. It seems like the problem with the Bohr's model is the same. If you look at like a 3D wave function, it's not like people think of it as being like up and down, but really it's a spiral, like an actual ocean wave. You know, it's a tube. Here you go, like this. This is what waves are actually doing essentially. Right.
And then you can polarize them, and you get some really counterintuitive effects when you layer polarizing filters. That's where you get quantum tunneling. And again, these types of things, when you're learning about them, you're going, all right, I'm learning this for the test, but I kind of don't believe you. Like, I understand there is this phenomenon, and that's how we're explaining it. But you're telling me that the shape of these orbitals is really what makes it fit together, or
it's because like these
quantum
orbitals
tunneling
are similar to other orbitals, and those orbitals have similar they have the same subatomic particles, and so those subatomic particles do get tangled, and because they're moving at such high speeds and high velocities.
Well,
I mean,
quantum tunneling and quantum entanglement and quantum superposition are all three separate different things.
right? True. I mean, still though, I mean, like these are all connected concepts.
I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night, if anyone's wondering. That's why I know all this stuff.
That's pretty based.
I wish I were smart enough, like Andreas, to have ChatGPT pulled up live, kind of doing this, but
ChatGPT is pretty cool. We should use him more, or her, or them. Again, with the whole mathematics in the medieval Islamic world, we're all about this idea. I think we need to start like looking at it more because it seems like right now we're at a weird time where people think science and spirituality don't jive, and that's very strange to me because clearly at a certain point they were the same thing. So we need to get back.
Well,
to that.
when you're doing cartographic work and you're part of a fleet of 1,000 boats that's gathering off the coast and deploying, and then mapping something with a system of linear measurements, essentially, that is almost on par, if not as accurate as the satellite system imagery we use today, it's almost more than religious. No, you're having faith that this is worthwhile, that you're going to be able to compile this data, and that it's going to be useful, and that it's not going to fall into the wrong hands. It's a big ask to ask people to either be, even if you force them away from their homeland and train them, and you know, the idea that they wouldn't mutiny or give up or just in despair. It's a big unknown out there. But if everyone had a radio transmitter and they were all podcasting back and forth and like, oh, Tony, good, you know, Frank.
All right. Well, I mean, maybe okay. How about the anthropomorphism? I guess we're almost 2 hours in, so I'm almost done. But like in terms of the anthropomorphism thing, so talking about like furthered complexity, does it make sense to you that at a certain point, something like the way God is described, like this all-knowing singularity, does that thing emerge? Like, are we on a path towards that?
Again, that's a lesson about not building a Tower of Babel in the sense that you're putting one satellite at a Lagrangian point and then sending all the information there and then loading it there. So there's a Judeo-Christian concept of an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, omniscient God, but that's not even most religious Jews and Christians vary from that to some extent. Like that's the litmus test you hold it up to when you're trying to learn how to think philosophically. And I had learned mathematical proofs, geometric proofs before that. So you have these decision trees and available options of corollaries and associated properties, and things sometimes are transitive where it works one way over the equation symbol, but not backwards. And if you don't have that awareness of how numbers work that way counterintuitively, sometimes that's how we get so caught up. People get so caught up, myself included, in political thinking or other things like that. So.
Well, I mean, atheism, like tries really hard to be, I think, quantum. Like it tries to break everything apart into like its smallest parts. But if you get meta and you start looking at it on a big scale, like does it become personified? I mean, this is clearly like not everybody agrees on this. Like the Muslim Allah is not really like a person. But I mean, how far does it go? Does it get to a point where consciousness does? Like, are we going to become a singularity like a person? Is that just because of human evolution? Like, would insects
will we have
do
the
it differently?
opportunity to join it, or will we be forced to do it? Or when you die, you like get that like one more reset code, and if you don't hit the code like the buttons in the right time, then that's
Well,
it.
I mean, like these are all like different ways it could happen, but like just in terms of this idea, like, I mean, we're saying, okay, the universe, we believe in evolution. You're talking about this atheistic kind of coherency, right? Everything.
Atheism, I heard described as a religion, because agnosticism,
Sure,
intellectually and philosophically, is a weak position. It's like you're lukewarm in my mouth, so I will spit you out. You're neither hot nor cold. But when it's really hard to disprove that God exists. I mean,
well, I mean, you just
Just as hard
change
as
definitions, but like this, the thing is God a person, or is the universe a person, or is all of it a person? That question is, I think you can kind of wonder about it by wondering, is it logical that we will become a bigger person? Like, am I right in assuming that we're headed towards further complexity of personification? Because if that's the thing, if the political body, if the social colonies of biology, if atomic orbitals, if that's all leading towards that,
yeah, but
then it
think
seems
about what's
like
really
it's-
being asked, Andres. Imagine you have the technology back then. The question being asked is, when I throw something out into the ether, when no one's listening, and it's what is 4 + 4, and I get back some sort of robotic voice that says 8, you're going, is that someone reading an output from? Because I think in the 11th century there were these two Russian saints that have been immortalized that said that invented grammar and some sort of like in syntax. It was grammar and syntax, and they kind of really boiled it down so you could translate between languages. But so I think the question back in the day was, are humans always going to be the intermediaries where we're putting our thoughts through this technology? Or will we get to a place like today where if I say, hey, Andreas, tell ChatGPT to write a poem about the Red Sox, that I believe that you're not just freestyling it there, that there is some sort of, and that there's not someone faking it to you that is making you believe that there's a computer generating, and like they can throw in some typos but so Seth, is what I'm saying making sense or offensive, or I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm so offended right now. I'm about to like spit fire. No, I'm
he's
just
about
kidding.
to tear down a statue of a Confederate Baphomet right now.
Well, the most pious and religious and holy people react with pure anger when people have.
I'm
questions
angry.
in
I'm
their own
offended
faith.
that you asked, even if he was offended. No, but like, look at this. Look at this universe for a second, right? Like, and so like, even just thinking about this, and obviously this is fake. Don't worry. But like, I mean, the idea though of coherency.
Don't worry.
Don't worry. But
This
like,
is not
you
the
know,
universe looking back at you, looking at it, looking back at you,
I
looking
mean,
at it, looking
it
back
doesn't
at you.
matter.
looking
Okay,
back
you
at
know what?
whatever.
Let's do it a whole different way for flat earthers, because that's not what I meant. I just meant like, obviously, like it's fake, but it has to be all that, you know. But like, even if you looked at it like you think everything, then even this, like this is like a techno-Gaianism, because you're saying like everything is one. That's a meta, you know, and it's all. It seems like that's a coherency to a certain point. And if memory is so important, and we're using digital noosphere to create memory, it seems like we're getting to a point where memory can be accessed by further and further complexity and simplicity. Like we have these machines now, right? Like these little microservers that can connect to the IoT, Internet of Things, all over the world, and they have access to like Chat GPT. I just saw Alpaca Pi. You could run was it Chat GPT Pi? You could literally like have a homebrew Chat GPT running on a Pi right now with like I think 7 gigabytes, or if you have a terabyte, like then you can have it be as smart as Chat GPT. So I mean, like this is the end of corporations controlling ChatGPT. This is the end of people, and this is what a lot of people are like. Oh, but who controls it? Who controls it? And I've been saying, like, the thing is, it's about to end, because as soon as it's in the public domain like this, then I mean, when people were typing the code, that was one thing, and when they were trying to stop the code from getting out, that was another. But now that you have it yourself, I mean, we're getting to a point where information is leading towards.
I mean, putting as much positive, good, useful information into this AI system, and it's like, what's the word? The different, oh wow, spaced out there. Whatever it's called, the program you run with it, the data
language
sets
model,
of them.
ChatGPT. Yeah, data sets.
Language model. There we go. There you go.
Well, so
Yeah.
because I had a background in photography, I broke my leg when I was a freshman in high school. Instead of playing sports, I just went to
Because
the
of
photo
your
lab and
photography background? Okay.
well, so here the idea that it's Photoshop because it has to be. And that's true even when you watch normal television and everything's in focus from the background to the foreground. Our eyes are so used to seeing a big screen, and we can look around the screen and everything's in focus. If you go back to old movies, if there are multiple focal points, that's like a $50,000 lens attachment. And now it's all done. It used to be done in post-processing. Now, real time, you have 5 cameras on your phone, 4
Right,
cameras.
yeah,
It's like Jake Paul was filming himself in the boxing ring, and it looks like he's in an AI studio.
You take 4 black and white photos. You
Just
use the same
is
camera,
CGI because it has to.
but you use different lenses to block out the light, and then you take those 4 photos and you superimpose them on top of each other, and you have the light spectrum from these different spectrums. And
But doing it real time on video while it's streaming is complex enough that people, and we take it so much for granted. There used to be part of the dramatic scene in Law and Order. It's like they'd have something in the foreground and the background, and part of the way when the dialogue would switch or a dramatic moment, the camera would totally switch its aperture and focus its zoom on something else. And now they're kind of just like a neutral focus. It tends to be. And if someone wants to hide the pixels in their face, they just like focus on the wall behind them or the microphone, and then they're not in perfect.
Do you
focus.
see further complexity heading towards personification? I mean, does it come to a point where it becomes a person?
Well, if the universe laughs at you and it's a person, is it being mean? And if it's an entity, you just feel honored that it's noticing you.
Like, I find it's interesting because it's like, even if you don't believe in God, even if you're not like into that idea, like you're talking about complexity of evolution. Does it get to a point where what we've just, because like even then you've described like what could have happened that we've interacted with. It could be that something like that created us or something. Then you've got some explanations for, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's God, right? Like, but I'm just trying to get to that point. Do you think it's possible for something like a God to evolve?
So I just shared a like a little argument that kind of supports.
It hasn't happened already.
That supports this paradigm. So this is kind of a formulation of one of what I consider a more probable. Is my internet okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're coming through clear on mine.
Okay. Yeah, so this is an argument that I find pretty persuasive in favor of God as an atheist. This is one of the best arguments I've seen. The premise one is that there's a high probability of many natural universes. So this is kind of the multiverse premise, right? Multiverse is true. There's a high probability that some natural universes evolve intelligent beings. This is the anthropic principle. We exist, therefore premise 2 is true. There's a high probability that some of these intelligent beings evolve to the point of immortality. This is, the stuff that Elon Musk and other tech giants are trying to work on. So that seems somewhat likely. And then there's also there are animals, like there's a flatworm that is immortal, basically. So this seems likely on 2 fronts. And there's a high probability that some of these immortals evolve into godlike beings. Therefore, there's a high probability that godlike beings exist. What do you think
Well,
of
so
that?
now we were talking about outside of orthodoxy. So there's a goat, and that's a mammal, but it's cold-blooded. And I'm not talking about Tom Brady as the cold-blooded goat. But no, there's it literally has to in the sun or else it dies. And
Dude,
it
they blocked
goes
you out.
almost into
Whatever you said about
hibernation
Tom
immediately.
Brady must have been good.
Well, people say he's the goat, and to be good at sports and clutch, they say are cold-blooded. But there's also a fish with no blood. It's not just clear. So then there's all these exceptions to the rule where everything falls in line. And then, but so what I hear you saying is like the universe. Can there be multiple universes? Well, if you're going to say there's multiple universes, let's use. It's a new time. It's kind of up to us to begin to find the things that make sense, because it makes less and less sense to the people we're telling it to that are younger, that aren't coming at it from different camps of thinking, and they're trying to absorb it at once. They're going, it's called a universe. So either call it like
I started
a possiverse, or like, and then maybe.
Yeah.
But when you say there are multiple natural universe, well, then again, my concept of what a universe is that it is everything, and you put divisions in there.
Right.
Again,
I mean,
at that point, you're talking about
what's
dividing up
interesting
frequency
about the word
ranges.
universe, right? So, like, again, like, because you're talking about, I think meta is a better word. If you're going to say, like, instead of us saying
metaverse.
universe
Ooh.
or a multiverse, you could say it's a meta. And in the meta, there is the universe. But I even, like, and I was, like, a big fan of the multiverse idea for the last 10, 15 years, probably. But I feel like Stephen Hawking's, when he realized his equations didn't work and he probably wasn't going to end up perfect again backwards in a black hole, like, my multiverse theories require space-time in a lot of ways. And so space-time, again, with, like, Nima, like, check out his work, because he's really trying to, like, explain, like, what happens with chirality-induced spin selectivity. Like, there's a certain expected there's a certain expected coupling that we expect to happen, and this has to do with electron charge. We don't even know if electrons are real, by the way. So that's like
Stephen Hawking in spin. And spin, like the wheelchair, the way it's currently designed, it's really easy to go over backwards. And when that happens, you smack your head on the ground. And there are wheelchairs that they have like an extra set of training wheels out back. But again, it took us to the 1970s to put wheels on our luggage. So maybe, again, as our parents age, we'll do it for them, and we're really doing it for ourselves in the future.
That's how I invented the flux capacitor,
but
Marty.
Metaverse, I like that.
Well, so not to say metaverse, it's just meta. So what I think, here's the thing. I think it's in the meta, there is the universe, right? And so the universe is the best arrangement of all these things. And all these ideas of multiverses, the problem with multiverses is that they're suggesting there's other ways that things work. And that simultaneously, essentially, there's functional orders of sin. And what Seth just proved is that's not true. Because you look at pi, and you can't find in any base of math where pi is not an irrational number, where pi is irrational. It's impossible to find. So what you see is like...
But none of us have measured it.
Okay, but an example might be that you take viruses.
And I think we could, the next stream...
We have experimented.
Seth, how do you feel about this? I think we could do it
in
real time. No,
right,
really
quickly.
I think it's literally.
Can you
just
remember
about
that thought
using
for
a
10
piece
seconds?
of string.
Okay, hold on. Before we get a clue,
Sure.
because that's what that means. I love that, to get a clue, and it's the string, because you have to pull out of
Because
the...
it's
Hades
something.
and all that.
The nature of this
I have
podcast is you
ADD
let
too.
things go.
As soon as
like
you
that,
say
but
a brilliant thing,
Hey,
it's gonna make
we're
me
gonna
go on a
do it.
tangent.
Hey, I still want to go back to that universe thing. So
But it's
you
the
guys
premise.
finish your
What
stuff.
everyone's saying is
Yeah, I'm trying so hard. So,
pi is this big. It might not even be. For all we know, it ends.
You are the Riddler. Where was I at? So the multiverse. So the problem is, if you were okay, just an example, just because of what Stefan said. Just to be fair, if you took 7,000 viruses, we did this in labs. Took 7,000 viruses, and then they put them in heat vats and forced them to evolve rapidly. And what they found is that after 50,000 simulated years of evolution, which happened very rapidly because these normally would have taken that amount of time in the heat and cycles, that only 47 scenarios worked, and then all the other viruses didn't evolve, or they died, or they just evolved into these things. It's like the crabification. There are things that work and there are things that don't work. So the idea of a universe is that this is the symmetry and the symmetry has a perfection. And there are tangentials, like in Donnie Darko. I don't know if you've seen the movie Donnie Darko, but in the movie Donnie Darko, there's this kid who he has a plane hit his room and he doesn't die, and he's living for like a month, and then the whole world ends around him. Starting with where the plane crashed, the world just starts to collapse, and he's the last one standing as everyone he loves dies around him. And then it switches, and you see that day again. Spoiler alert: the plane kills Donnie. So in one reality, we have the what's that called? That little dandelion? It's like a dandelion. You see his reality splitting away from the meta reality. So from his quantum, he's seeing the universe ending. But in reality, it's his universe that's ending. So it's not that it's really a multiverse. It's that he's fractured from the universe. And so that has a destinial end, where the universe has an omega point. And the omega point might be, like, very well, infinity, eternity, and God, right? And
so when my internet cut off, this is tied into the religious aspect. So, Seth, I know that there's, like, I don't know if you practice or believe, but the story of Adam and Eve in that Vitruvian man, and I made a comment that it looked almost like conjoined twins. And someone was trying to understand how the layout be and where the veins might be, as opposed to a person in motion. So the rabbi told a story about how one interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve is that it was essentially a man and woman that were conjoined at the back. So they couldn't see each other. So they would move around in cooperation, but they were always back to back. And that's like a metaphorical thing about maybe a relation. And that when the New Year's came,
who is moving back to back? I missed that.
Oh, so Adam and Eve.
So they're like glued together back to back?
Well,
so
like
instead
he didn't
of
pull
the
the
story
rib
being
out.
He was made from the rib. He was made from the rib, and then she was immediately free. There was a phase where after she was being fashioned out of his rib, they were stuck back like an eight-legged being or something.
This is some mythological text.
Again, this is like
Kabbalistic,
a Rebbe.
like, yeah.
He's going back to previous translations and not relying on the glossaries and using.
You have to understand, like, there's even like Babylonian. There's Babylonian Talmud as well, and like so like the Talmud, people give it a bad rap, like it's like sometimes certain priests and rabbis said horrible things in the thousands of years of history, but they also said a lot of interesting things too. And they lived in Russia, they lived in New York, but they also lived in ancient Babylon. So it's interesting to read it from a historical context and see, like, they're living in Babylon and they're thinking of things from Babylonian perspectives. And a lot of that has to do with, and the Greeks have this too, the idea that the soul is a twin flame, the splitting of the soul, and the rib representing that at some point there's a separation,
See, as a child, but I didn't go to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Seth.
I was just going to say, yeah, keep going, because I'm not understanding what the point of this is, so keep going.
So allegorical thinking, and that, again, whether if you can't engage in it readily, it's not part of your regular arsenal of tools that one uses as their cognitive biases intercede on the way they react on things emotionally or logically. But so I think that certain religions, they can instill values, they can instill discipline. The reason there's so many creatives, I think, that come out of American Judaism is because we don't really focus too much on the holidays. As a kid, the one thing is that you're passing around parsley, and you never make salt water and eat it on purpose. And it's this one weird thing, and it's like safe to do, and it's a physical metaphor for tasting the tears of your ancestors, and then it's something that's made out of cinnamon and apples and nuts, and it tastes really good, and it's fun to make it. It's like one of the first recipes you learn as like a 5, but it represents the mortar of the bricks that your ancestors had to slave in the sun for, and so it's building structures of. So this 8-legged being, that's terrifying. Why are you turning the story of Adam and Eve into this horror show? And it's like, no, but it's a different story. And the rabbi then explains to both the children and the adults in the audience, because again, they're going, blasphemy. How is the rabbi I've known for 40 years, he just got back from some sabbatical, and who the heck was he hanging out with? He's talking about Adam and Eve as an 8-legged, Siamese twin, male, female, back to back. But then again, so there's 7 days after you fast between the day of atonement and the day of New Year's. And the idea that's a slow process of separating them and then turning to face.
There it is.
So now
coming out of the rib.
You're actually calming the kids. They're saying, don't worry, there's no such thing as conjoined twins out there. But in reality, that was, I was taught very clearly.
So like, what is the male, right? And which came first, the chicken or the egg? Obviously the egg. Right? I mean, like the chicken isn't necessary because it could have been a dragon or whatever evolved first, right? It's evolution. We know that it comes out of an egg. Eggs are the thing. So
Yeah.
here you've got, mutation. What comes first, the X or the Y? The X, right? And so obviously this story of Adam and Eve is confused because we think of it as being a man first, but this idea of, likely the female, like it has to come from the female first, right? And so
What you need actually is camel poop, because when they would gather all the chicken eggs and they would build an underground cavern with a bunch of like shelves in the wall, and then they would lay the chicken eggs on there, and that was why they started adding.
It's all a lie. Birds are fake.
So I still feel like
they would add incense to it.
I still feel like I lost
we are getting lost. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I lost the plot because we were talking about arguments for God, then we were talking about pie,
Yep.
and now we're
Yep.
to like conjoined Adam and Eve. I don't know where we're going.
Yeah, I was curious too. Is the conjoined Adam and
challenging
Eve
the
thing to
paradigm.
do with the positive and negativity, like magnetism? Are you talking about that? Are you trying to get into like why we have positive and negatives, X and Y's, or like what are you getting at? Also, chickens don't have X and Y's. They have like KWs or something weird like that. Chicken.
So when I interject, oftentimes I am coming at it from this somewhat devil's advocate, contrarian standpoint. But if you let me talk for long enough too, I immediately do that to myself. And JP Sears, he says, yes, but do you see the dark side? And what you're saying is true, is that pie does go on forever. But do you see the fact that flat earthers make fun of people where you've never seen the curve, you've never measured it, and
So
I believe that pie does keep going
like-
on, but how funny would it be if that was like one of the because it wouldn't
Chickens
really
have
change
ZW.
very much.
So,
they add
like-
like 50. They just add like.
Too much information stuff.
And now, do you believe that someone's?
I'm gonna block them just so you can think for a second.
Yeah. So basically the pie thing, like my thought process as I walked through this analysis of pie, my conclusion was that the structure of pie is an infinite is a function that is approaching infinite detail. It's constantly zooming in and correcting the curve, zooming in, correcting the curve, because at any layer of zoom, you've got an imperfect curve. And so the only way to have a perfect curve is to zoom in infinitely and course correct everything.
That is what usual mathematical equations do that don't follow the irrational principle of a non-repeating, infinitely non-ending decimal point. So guys, what it's doing is actually course correction. So as it zooms in, it's now adopting a random sensing algorithm, and instead of following a curve, it's seeing where it's at and then zooming in on that. And so it's achieving the accuracy by oscillating back and forth between complete certainty enough to zoom in exactly where you want and narrow the field that much and then pull that in. But then you have to decide where to aim after that. And usually the computer wants an algorithm ready to go at that moment of decision. And instead of what you're doing at that moment is telling it, now you're picking out something in the field that is in, if it is repeating, you know that there's something, like you have these self-check mechanisms on algorithms so that it won't run ad infinitum if it can tell that the answer already is off. You know, if
Have
it
you ever
gets
seen that movie Flubber? Did you ever watch Flubber?
Oh yeah.
There's this great scene in Flubber where he walks into the classroom at the beginning. It's the wrong classroom. It's like a nude modeling class or something. But he sees like naked man, naked woman. And he's like, explains like their, atomic mass should force them to be pulled together. Like, what is it that stops that from happening? And he says, the Earth, right? And it's kind of like, it's brilliant on a few levels because he's kind of trying to talk about, what we understand as gravity or gravitational mass, this idea of like of mass and like, but that is really, this idea of separation also.
Well, let's say that
and love.
neutrinos activate gravitrons. Let's say we haven't detected gravity waves, or let's say even light energy. All of a sudden it goes pitch black and we don't know why. So you were saying that there are certain fixed known things, and chemicals will always react in certain ratios, and when especially you add the math to it. In reality, that's under, we perceive like sea level, room temperature. And again, as soon as you put crazy magnetic fields on it, you could be channeling other things that are now, because there's something called for a reaction to be spontaneous and predictable. So there's activation energy where there's like, it's sitting over here on this curve. And then if it gets like a spark and it gets like, it's like water pulling over in a siphon, the whole all the substances will react, but you have to give it that first spark, and then it becomes spontaneous. Now, there are certain substances that, again, with the wrong the wrong radio station playing nearby, someone's phone goes off, and the block of C4 spontaneously detonates, essentially, or whatever thing that, whatever shape of the carbon lattice that happens.
As a tangent program, watch Son of Flubber, the sequel to the original from 1958, I think, or 1960, which is really like a kind of a dig at the government from Walt Disney, who was upset that they weren't in helping him like change the world fast enough. You should definitely watch Son of Flubber. Well, but just, I just want to say the idea of masculine,
good metaphors.
Masculine and feminine are interesting. And some, I think Piano Gigger talking about mass, like this idea that mass is supposed to be able to be apart, but it comes together. So we have dynamic, and so dynamic is interesting because we don't need to have dynamic, but dynamic is what makes all of creation possible. If everything was at absolute zero, there would be no reason for there to be dynamic. But dynamic is a major part of our reality. So femininity and masculinity have a lot to do with magnetic positive and magnetic negative, which have to do with creating field, right?
Yeah. So can we go back to this multiverse topic?
Sure. Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. So there was discussion about terminology, semantics. For me, a universe, it seems reasonable to reduce a universe to everything that is instantiated by a Big Bang. So our universe was instantiated by a singular Big Bang. And so if there are multiple Big Bangs, there could be multiple universes based on those instantiations, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this hypothesis.
And they could overlap.
Maybe. I don't know. This is very
if they
theoretical.
Exist on different yeah, exactly.
It's very theoretical.
But there are eureka moments. Instead of Big Bang moments, the humans, the element that we add to it through synthesis by acting like a really simple like bee or an ant, where we somehow have created this manifestation of something that's a lot more than I could have done on my own.
Yeah, but a lot of the problem with the multiverse theory is it suggests that there's an infinite number. Usually the multiverse theory is tied to this idea of an infinite number of universes. And so the problem with that, again, if you use pure mathematics, like at a certain point, it's impossible. There are finite possibilities. So it's unlikely. And at a certain time that starts to contract. And how many of those can last for a long period of time, right?
Well, I don't follow. What context are you talking?
So, like, the idea that there's infinite universes requires infinite possibilities.
Well, see, I see that what you're saying applies in two different contexts, actually. There's the sun and stars collapsing. There's a lot of elements here. We're not just made up of hydrogen and helium. So it's evidence that we've not only, like, we've been here as, like, people and entities and consciousness. It's, like, the matter that we're made up has been... And so also the kind of the eureka moments, the synthesis of ideas and the outpouring of them. And sometimes when certain technology gets out, it's destructive or but so like dynamic. So we could say that there's no bacteria that eats plastic, and that's why it gathers in the ocean. And it's like, if we could just, we made E. coli spit out insulin or any number of other things by literally shooting gold particles at it with other DNA on it, as though that was going to work, and somehow it did, or but there eventually could be lots of different, maybe all the bacteria could evolve to eat plastic. They just need a different enzyme. And again, that could have to do with a frequency of light that the sun is giving off that we're not seeing, that all of a sudden, like their version of chlorophyll now incorporates magnesium. And it means that they can pick this out and they can now eat plastic. And so the bumper on your car all of a sudden disappears every 2 years and you need to replace it because it's biodegradable all of a sudden. It wasn't biodegradable before, but now it is. Yeah. And so the idea that things are, is it humans' job to manifest that and make that happen? Are we hopeful that eventually nature will find a place for it to evolve and that it won't invade our way of living? Because there's a lot of things that would go wrong if that happened.
Whoa. Now it's you know who I possess it, you know why I place it, you know where I know it's why that does not care. Now it's you know who I possess it, you know why I place it, you know where I know it's why that does not care. Now it's you know who I possess it, you know why I place it, you know where I know it's why that does not care. Now it's you know who I possess it, you know why I place it, you know where I know it's why that does not care. Art already immortal, morals for the innovation so fresh. Stand and confess that tomorrow is but a fanciful mesh. This is the innovation, stand and acknowledge. Understand we not there. Wish we had this is the innovation, stand and acknowledge. Little matter.
Sorry. Keep going.
So
Dude,
meta.
Mark Zuckerberg should buy that song from me.
I know, right? Dude. It was like
I didn't even occur to me till because again, like we've appropriated that word now because they kind of.
Oh, I had it first. I actually
painted.
had Metabro420. That was my YouTube name at one point. So long ago.
The first time I
Okay.
heard the word meta, anyone? What was? anyone wanna share?
But when we were getting somewhere with the multiverse idea,
Oh, yeah.
you're talking about Seth. I'm sorry.
Meta World Peace. It was a basketball
so-
player who fought all the time. But,
I feel like
Change
we're
it.
talking about different models of the metaverse, so I kind of want to, or the multiverse. So I kind of want to describe my model of the multiverse.
Sounds legit.
And it's based on Brian Greene. He models it out in his book, The Elegant Universe. And basically, it's a black hole reproduction paradigm. The concept is black holes are the key, the womb of a new universe. The black hole is the mother that gives birth. It creates a big bang for a new universe. And so this new universe, it builds its own black holes. And so if universe A has one black hole, it gives birth to one universe. If universe B has two black holes, then it gives birth to two universes. And so you've got this selection for reproduction where the universes are getting better and better. Like the physical constants, the laws of physics are tuning to produce more black holes and to get more reproduction. And so now we are
and different types of black holes.
Sure. And so we have this
There's
perspective.
supermassive black holes and
We look out and like there's tons of black holes everywhere. Every single galaxy has a black hole. And so it kind of, there's an intuitive grasp that this universe.
it's not every
has-
galaxy. For a while, we thought the Milky Way didn't have one, and then
Oh,
they
dude.
think we do have one. But there are
So,
some
like, all right, I
galaxies
remember- I just wanna-
that have very
I
spiral.
remember when
strings. The
I
Hubble-
remember when I freaked out about all this because I was in like fourth grade, I think, third or fourth grade, and it was Scholastic Book Fair or whatever, and they came to town and they had the Scholastic magazine, and the Scholastic magazine had Stephen Hawkins, and it was talking about black holes, and I was like, oh man, because then like expansion, but
See, I'm hearing myself say it as
compression,
corrective,
because that would explain
but-
massive compression. If we're getting all of that mass put into a black hole, then what if that's what is happening, and that's the end of our universe? Is that we're being sucked into a black hole over a period of time? It's like, oh
It's the current
man.
consensus.
The problem with
Is
that,
the universe expanding?
of course it is, but
Is
it's
it
also
steady
contracting.
state or is it contracting? And that was
What-
like the crescendo of
At
class.
what time are
By
you
the end,
asking?
we were
And
gonna,
for how long is your metric? Because it's breathing in and out, and so this is the
Exact-
problem.
And then right.
This is the
And you
problem
wanna
that
talk about
Stephen
some
Hawking's
long
eventually. This
math
is why.
equations with some
This is what
big
Brian
unknowns,
Greene's.
yeah.
This is one of Brian Greene's, in my opinion, his like hypothesis is his problem is it's based on Stephen Hawking's original black hole theory before. I forget the name of his student, but at a certain point, Stephen Hawking had a student who created a computer program to run his formulas, and they wouldn't work. And so Stephen Hawking's like, "No, actually, it's your fault. You're doing it wrong." And then
But see,
no, like,
here's
over and
from
over
an
again, they
academic
proved he was
learning
wrong. Like,
standpoint, and I think this is actually kind of profound. If I said it to myself out loud in my head, so the idea of the heat death of the universe, instead in the Big Bang, the idea that it came from, but so by having a discussion about is the universe expanding, is it steady state, or is it collapsing? And then what is the scale of time that that's happening on? And is it accelerating in its expansion or its contraction?
even-
and outside of
even-
agreeing on that, the interesting thing that comes out of it is that if we did keep expanding and things got farther and farther apart, that everything reaches absolute zero because it's not touching anything else and it's not really moving. And then that is what cold is. And cold is not getting goosebumps. And cold is not ice freezing. Cold
It's
is
lack of
everything is the
vibration.
heat death of the universe, you know?
It's lack of vibration. But the thing is,
So-
okay, so here's one last thing I want to say is like the black hole. So then this idea of like, what is a black hole? What is the function of a black hole? It's where all of energy goes, right? So it sucks in the density of energy. So when we're talking about this idea of matter is energy moving slow enough to be seen, how much more relevant is it then? And so this is kind of where it is true, like black holes are a major part of what we're considering space-time, right? Because they're something that's holding together the expanse of energy. But then again, like that means like probably energy going into a black hole is then disseminated back into the entangled hole, into the meta, right?
Yeah.
Well,
so
no. So
basically,
yeah. Go ahead, please.
yeah. Sorry. What I wanted to say is, I think that the multiverse, this Brian Greene paradigm, is independent of the conclusion of the universe. Whether or not we have a big crunch, whether or not we have a heat death expansion, it doesn't matter. The multiverse still functions the same.
I mean,
Especially
I think
the
problem is
macrocosmic applications of the multiverse.
the problem is still the omega point. The problem is still the omega point. This idea that where's my, give me like a map, chart. Like if you're considering this idea that things have a finite destiny, but that we're looking at a fractal, that doesn't make any sense for there to be a finite. It has to be infinite. So it makes more sense that there has to be like a perfect symmetry, right? Because if there's an infinite, then the perfect symmetry is the one that holds together best, and anything that deviates from that eventually falls apart. And so there's everything else is finite.
Well, so again, I learned as like a rule.
Except
so
the
absolute
universe.
zero, 273, negative 273. Now, Russia said, look, we just did an experiment. And by your definition of cold, it's not getting colder, but we're getting negative Kelvin values now, up to a negative infinity. And what they're doing is they're like with adiabatic pressure, where you're having changes without change in temperature and pressure. In your, it's like a Bose-Einstein condensate, you're shooting it with lasers, and you're forcing things to happen in that
Bernie's
crystalline
bringing
matrix.
up the Schwarzschild radius. What's this about, Bernie?
Did any of that land though? Because again, that's some like state of the art.
An esteemed Hermann Schwarzschild's proton where black hole.
You'll have to push harder, Stefan. I didn't quite get it, but I'll try again.
No, that wasn't me. I can explain the Schwarzschild radius. The tetragrammaton is that. I mean,
What
that's
about
his claim. That was his like, because this is someone who was rejected by academics. So as far as paradigm breaking and having a following and having people appreciate the work that you've put in and agree with you, even if you don't get the credit and the glory. You know, Einstein, when he submitted his papers, no one like gave him a ribbon until like 30 years later. You know, but that was Nassim Harameyn's acceptance into, or the bit of his wisdom. He found a really simple equation that, again, seems like with all this, with Euclid and all the other smart people in the past that have put their eyeballs on this, either they came up with this and they hit it because it's that powerful, and that's found it and put it out there. Maybe he left out a coefficient on purpose and would be noticed, but it has to do with the vacuum density and extracting energy. You know, what
You were trying to lay something.
E equals mc squared. Like plutonium, this much of it will like boil like thousands of gallons of water for like years. And so, and that's not even detonating it. That's just it decaying. So E equals mc squared. That's the vacuum density of the energy. As soon as we extract that, you got to be careful.
To give you more religious fuel to the allegorical take on science, Jesus, he said, if you had a mustard seed of faith, you could move a mountain. E equals mc squared on a mustard seed.
Right. Well, yeah, and like you can think of all like the root structure. Like, I think again with like telos, so on one hand, it's funny to be reductionist and say, okay, well, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, so obviously there's nothing to a mustard seed, so we don't get the kingdom of heaven. But on the other hand, it's a lot because it's telos, it's telescopic. You're saying that from the seed you can see the fruits of the tree and how it affects everything, and you can judge a lot by the fruits of the tree. But also, like that even is in that Mandelbrot math set, you can judge an ecosystem and all that lives in that ecosystem from it.
You hear that's how we're trying to. It's called panspermia, and instead of sending our DNA out, there's something called a water bear.
Tardigrades, right?
A tardigrade, and so we're setting up cannons. And when you shoot this giant laser cannon out into space, it's resonating at certain frequencies. And so the things that are in the way will stack up according to their density and their cohesiveness, you know, surface tension, internal factor. And so
people don't like it, but this is peak physics.
This is quantum tunneling. We're shooting the tardigrades instantly 4 light years out into space, okay? By turning it on, by putting a bunch of the tardigrades on top of the spotlight for Batman, and then turning it on, mathematically conceptually, it's sound reasoning to say that some of those tardigrades instantly quantum tunnel all the way to the end of however far that beam reaches out into the.
This is what will evolve to look like
So
eventually.
Star Trek New Discovery was correct with tardigrades being the key to quantum space travel.
Yeah.
It looks so cute. I want to scratch his belly.
And adorable. I want to have a jacket like this with extra arms and everything.
In
So, Andreas, should we try
do have
Should we try to tie this all back to your original question? How does all of this synthesize into the mind of God, either at the end of time or the beginning of time?
Yeah.
Well, relating it to pi,
God is technically
it's either
both simultaneously.
Go ahead.
You're hard to understand because your internet connection is a little off.
And your mic should
I
be far
know, it's
closer to your
horrible.
face.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You need to bring.
Well, we're giving you
Sorry
the space.
about
Put your mic by your face. Yeah, that helps a lot.
So here's the thing: is if the ultimate manifestation of the divine mimics pi, that means it's chaos and it's infinite, and there's no code of ethics that's fixed or even guided by anything. Again, it's a continued zoom in and then random choice, zoom in, random choice, and try to refine. So that's kind of a scary way to think about it.
So God is chaos. That's the conclusion.
Well, that's one, because there are other pieces of math that do exist as
Free
as
will has a
whole
lot to do
ratios.
with chaos, I think. You know, I mean, like the idea that everything is perfectly symmetrical would be lacking in that. It's interesting, like that little error is the amount of free will you have. It's so little, but it's enough to create all the suffering in the world, all the chaos, all the famine, all the death, all the desire. You know, I think, all the fantasies, all the dreams. So
And
it's
I got
kind of
stuck on that Punnett square too, right? You're going because it's 4 boxes. It's free will and determinism. But the thing that it's hard to rise above, it's like, no, the chemicals reactions in your head might be predetermined in the sense that they were always going to play out this way. There's nothing that's going to come and act on your brain that's going to force you specifically to make a choice at a specific neuron. Now, waves could hit your brain and intersect or interfere with certain types of thinking, but it's not the idea is that it wouldn't have to. There could be randomness in the system without there being a divine entity that has the ability to basically move pieces on the chessboard from afar.
Right, and you could think also like in ancient Egypt, they knew this idea of Ma'at and Set.
You have to steer your own
Someone
ship.
brought up
Set.
the god of chaos, right?
Yes, that's
I
me.
mean, chaos is important, but chaos doesn't exist without order, right? Order doesn't exist without chaos. I mean, balance and everything. So I feel like it's not that there's really like one without the other. Like these are much more realistically like than good and evil, order and chaos. Or
Well, Rick and Morty were portal jumping, and all of a sudden they ended up in this universe, and like the corn was fractal, and the bugs were fractal, and they go, "Oh shit, we're in one of the multiverse. Yeah, let's go. We got to get out of this one. This one always gets really messed up really quickly." But we're kind of in one of those universes where entropy as a law. Even the society holds together more than the theory of entropy, even just from a interpersonal situation, let alone, again, it's just.
So my issue is with the whole guy at the beginning
no
of
primordial
this.
soup for you. Sorry.
My whole issue is I feel like the title God implies like a mind and an intention. And so if we have chaos at base reality, I don't feel like God is a good name for that chaos unless there's an intention and a mind at that level of analysis.
Okay, well then maybe it's because you're thinking of like your heavenly father instead of like Eris, like the goddess of chaos. Maybe you just need like to think of it differently. You know what I mean?
When this hit me freshman year of college, I wake up, I think I'm smart. I've read all the philosophy from all the different countries and time periods, and I get there, and this guy goes, "I'm pretty Catholic," or I was raised Jewish. He was a lot more religious and kind of slept with the Bible by his bed, and it didn't weird me out because he was just such like a solid. Growing up, if someone was religious, it was usually a sign of something. Just I'm not saying that.
Don't
I
come to
that
school
now
this
as an
day.
adult.
Yeah, okay.
It's a totally different thing. I think that it's easy for children to get scared into conforming because, but it's like I don't want my kids to be Christian because I don't want them to be afraid of Jesus. Is not the reason. Is like such wrong think about why religion would be good for a community. But so the idea that God existed, male, female, and it loved the version of us that exists now, even though it's imperfect so much, and it knew it had to consume itself in the process of making the Big Bang or the many Big Bangs happen, and then keeping it on track, where to keep the entity's hands off it, so that it does play out, so that there's no we do have free will, and society doesn't fall apart, or individuals' way of thinking doesn't fall apart because we feel like we don't have to be responsible for, or worse, that we're not responsible for things that we do that hurt other people, or on purpose, or. And now we're straying into moral territory. What's hurt? But so the idea of like, what's a black hole? And Stephen Hawking, let's say he was going to an Epstein Island type thing, and he was really against it. Okay, and no matter what, there was like, he was part of some agency, like the Secret Service for he had like an entourage, and there was every 5 years he's getting new crews of people. There's no continuity of care, and he's like, I know. So they're eventually going to bring me back to a strip club, because you said he spent a lot of his times in strip clubs, right?
He did.
But imagine. It was like the most immoral thing, and somehow that's the black hole. He was not able to communicate, and that's the thing, is once you see these things exist and you think it's exploitative, and know and love, you get hurt or taken advantage of. And some of you might even feel like it's your fault, that they might blame you for, whatever that is. I mean, outside of that, that's always going to exist anyways. And the feeling, it's like if you knew the Twin Towers were wired to come down and build Building 7, and you were like not really going to run around yelling about it, because maybe it was just like an insurance thing, so it wouldn't fall on other buildings. But I think that it's those moments where something is happening. It's like that even other people know, and yet there's absolutely nothing you're going to do to make prostitution go away from the whole world. You can live as an ascetic in a cave and separate yourself from it, but so that feeling of being Stephen Hawking, and again, he changed his mind. Now, he was so certain in his career, and he used that little computer to argue with his other scientists that, they even put a bet on the wall. They typed it out. I think that we're going to show that black holes don't exist. Because again, even if and then he changed his mind at the end. And I think it was an allegorical thing that he was trying. That was why scientists are not supposed to capitulate without an abundance of data, and you're not, especially not capitulate to the other side with such certainty that you held the other side based on all the evidence that you did have already. Because again, the idea that a black hole could explode, now you have to redefine the black hole. The black hole is an event horizon beyond which nothing can escape. Now, there's a chance that on the surface of that infinitesimally small point, which again has zero surface area, all the information that's ever flowed into that black hole is encoded. And so it has a path to flow back out of that hole. And that's where Nassim Haramein kind of came up with, he said maybe there's one electron and it's everywhere. It's following that pathway. And thank you guys for, again, not laughing too hard or.
No, I agree.
Playing the outro music.
Well, I think, Bernie's pretty tired, and which is amazing.
Yes,
I outlasted Bernie for once.
Oh God!
But we're pretty
7 a.m.
We're about 3 hours deep. Seth, what else? Are you trying to cover anything else? What else do you want to go? You want to keep going for a bit, or where are you at, Seth? What do you think?
I feel like we addressed a lot of the main points. We didn't get into abiogenesis that much. We might have to do another one to go deeper into that.
That's true. I really do want to
go. That's becoming more popular as a topic on YouTube, and it's being discussed in a way instead of between two entrenched camps of creationists and Neil deGrasse Bison types. They're going through the actual. This is what, again, like Einstein had to do with a couple of his, like for 3 years. They would just kind of keep having the same argument, and they would push it on, and then it would kind of crystallize and snap into place. And it meant that the math made more sense, and it explained some of the things that they couldn't explain. But once they had the periodic table, they would. There's something called like Ica aluminum. They would add Ica at the beginning, and it meant that they predicted that they would eventually find an element that fit in that space that had certain properties, and that eventually got up into the hundreds and was are radioactive. They only exist for microseconds and they decay. But there was a time where we were still filling out the bottom half of the periodic table, and a lot of the guys. They say they're Tartarian that did it. It's like they're coming from a place where they're like, really, you guys don't have this on your tables? Like, how far behind are you? So Dendera. These are this is a little snippet. What do you know about Dendera, Seth, in Egypt?
I know nothing, but you made me think about a UFO video clip. So
Go ahead. I'll write mine down. You can go with yours first.
I have like a 2-minute video that I can find if you're interested in. It's about the periodic table connection to UFOs. It's kind of off topic.
It sounds cool. Where's that at?
I need a minute to find the video.
All right. You're not gonna ad strike me, are you?
Well, so Andreas, I don't know if
Playing
you've
your
heard this
video.
angle before. And again, it's not super significant, but
Look, I
Dendera.
even know when this was thought track, but think that I don't want to go so no. This stuff is stretching me more than that's because you're more off. Yeah, that's the old guitar. Then there's some old fashioned take off acting, just keep go outside, get that split bigger than that.
Just an old-fashioned techno song. I play just an old-fashioned techno song. Just an old-fashioned techno song. I play just an old-fashioned techno song. If you days will remember, I know the way tomorrow used to glow. Future was bright, had to be there to know. Must have been 2 or 3 so long ago. Now we're ancient history alone. So I play that ancient techno from the ground. The fate is on this and it's been so long. I'll dust it off and see it may be wrong.
All right. Well, you get the point. You're talking about dendrites, though. No, were you talking about dendrites? You're about
Dendera.
the temple
The temple,
Dendera.
so-
I was looking at it. I don't know why I could pretend.
There's a
dendrites.
whole series on Dendera that came out recently trying to debate whether or not they're giant eggplants or vacuum tubes on the wall. Okay? On the melted staircase. Right? I mean, Andreas, you're familiar with that, no?
With what?
So this is one of the things it's been on the top 10.
Oh, the
Discovery
Dendera.
Channel.
Yeah, the Dendera. Yeah.
But it's
Isn't it-
twofold, and I've never heard them
One of the-
reconciled. So originally in the 1920s, the big deal about Dendera was we literally blew out the ceiling of one of these temples. We wonder why they look this way. Again, on record, we brought home this giant stone slab, and it was like the Mayan circular calendar. They claimed it was more significant though, because when you followed the constellations back, it showed 28,000 years or something of history, and this was a time where people were doing the whole creationist debate with Darwin, and young Earth creationism's timeline is very, very. I mean, I believe that intelligent design could be true, and that we kind of bred ourselves, or that maybe even like Bigfoot bred us because we were like its weird, retarded, wimpy cousin, and it felt bad for us, and then we ended up like ants taking over the nest, kind of, and.
Is this the video?
But so Dendera was this major, because it cut into religion, it cut into astrology, it cut into astronomy, the mathematics. They were confirming it, and the Babylon newspaper had declared it. This is 28,000 years old, and people were saying, heresy, bullshit. I now believe none of what you're talking about, because you've now blasphemed. You've said that you've mathematically determined that the constellations on here, the way they're oriented, shows that they have an understanding that, and again, I'm not even sure, they don't get into the details of that. And when you look at the carvings, they're not all that precise. It looks like a whole bunch of like shitty spiral cartoons. The Mayan calendar is a lot more impressive, or Aztec. But so Dendera also seems to have these giant light bulbs or eggplants drawn in like a melted staircase, and like apparently that was the same temple. I wonder what it looked like before we fucking blew it up and stole the ceiling. Where was the ceiling?
Yeah.
It's a pyramid.
This clip, I can only you can just tell me what it says, Seth, instead of playing the audio. But what's it say? Oh, you're muted, Seth. Haha. Because you were typing and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I'm good now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can summarize it. Basically, there's the clip where they're in Congress and they're kind of like testifying as to what they know, and they were saying that the UFOs. They asked the congressperson, "Is it true that these UFOs are doing things that are beyond our understanding of the laws of physics?" And the Congress, or the person responding to Congress, was very careful and precise in his response. He said, "We know that they are beyond our understanding of material science." So he switched from laws of physics to a very specific area, material science. But then
that's royal we, though. You understand that? And the person who's in the PR position, like the announced leader of the CIA, it's called plausible deniability. I learned that from Will Smith and Independence Day and Data, the long-haired scientist. And it's like the president doesn't even know about this and why. It's plausible deniability. And so if you're forward-facing and you have credibility on a topic, I think if you have no credibility on a topic, if you're an MMA fighter, or if you're Tom DeLonge, you might actually get to see rocket copters and like.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I find really interesting with like metamaterials, like when you start looking at carbon, right? So one of the reasons I think nanotechnology is interesting, like when you if you wanted to make graphene or you wanted to make amazing nano, like fullerenes.
Yeah,
this is a fullerene, right?
Buckyballs.
Well, this there's a funny story behind this, but just what happens is like you can burn stuff. Carbon will then arrange itself, and then out of that you'll have all sorts of amazing arrangements. And so you'll get
the
graphene,
nice parallel here
you'll
is
get
that's
nano
the actual seam pattern for a soccer ball. That's how microcosm and the way that carbon when it does fold itself into there actually is a space inside of that. So that's not true. There are other spherical.
I feel like Stefan already knows the funny story behind it, but like what happened was they were, they found this when they were looking at a SEM, like, oh my God, look at the structure. It's so impressive. And they're looking at it, all these different ways to look at it. And they finally brought it to, I forget who it was. I think it was at MIT, but he's like, well, there's a lot of ways to describe what you found here, this carbon-60 molecule. But what you have is a soccer ball, right? And that was kind of the joke, because it's like, oh man, we do see the Adidas, structure. No,
but it's an emergent logic in the universe. If you're using, because what carbon is doing is that it's trying to find the closest way that all those covalent bonds can kind of stick together and click.
Yeah.
And so,
carbon loves 6.
When we talk about panspermia and how could DNA have ended up here? So what was the Seth, you brought it up, the specific name. It's the progressive, the idea that there were these oozy pools that had crystalline surfaces and getting zapped with lightning.
Abiogenesis.
Thank you, abiogenesis. I got to put that new word in my vocabulary. But the alternative to
I call it abiogenesis.
Is that it got a jump start because buckyballs exist. No matter where you burn things, if ends up at a high carbon environment, you potentially inside of that matrix, it's really protected from outer space in a lot of ways that are not conceptually consistent with the way we think of putting things inside containers.
But the point is that in nature, these things emerge, right? Like these patterns emerge. It's really beautiful. And all it takes is a little bit of like fire, and like you heat up the carbon, and then it naturally is trying to form into nano onions, nano walls, graphene, carbon 60s, fullerenes, any number of different.
This is where you go from cracking open the lid of Pandora's box to knocking on heaven's door. So you know how chlorophyll is just a crystalline structure. It's not quite as
it's like
the same
I'm a
as
carbon. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is who I want to be. This is what I love.
Imagine again, you create a chlorophyll for radio frequency wave 850 AM, and you never really figure that out until you're transporting it. And the guy next to you has like a shortwave radio and happens to be using that frequency, and it goes through what you think is a charcoal filter for your pool, and really you've doped it with something that is chlorophyll, and it takes the light, and instead of making energy for the plant and C6H12O6 out of water and starch and sugars and glucose, instead of it doing that, it just farts out E equals MC squared because it caught the wrong radio station. The likelihood of doing that on purpose or by accident are both very low. But that's kind of when Ian walks around and wants to talk about graphene with everyone, it's like C4 explosive is like the same chemical as like diamond is the same chemical as like the graphene in your pencil. And
yeah, it's all about the structure.
Seems pretty stable. And the fact that I think the weather's
is key.
But wait, Seth, that wasn't quite your question, right? What was your question? I'm trying not to dodge questions with my ADHD.
Oh, yeah, this was mostly a tangent. We were talking about the periodic table, and just it seems like
a second video. Didn't you have a second video you were going to show?
Well, the same video has 2 clips, and I haven't talked about the second clip yet, but the second clip is basically saying There's a guy who's ex-CIA, and he said that there are secret aerospace projects that are using materials science that is hidden from the professors and the universities.
Oh, for sure.
So basically, there's a parallel between what UFOs are doing and what the government is hiding from us. They're both special in the same way. You can draw what connections you will.
Yeah, I mean,
Wasn't
like
that when
hiding
we
is a
went-
strong word. I think that the thing
Or
about
if we
hiding
went-
is that this technology is available, but the fabrication processes are too expensive for anyone to get involved with them. Even though you could, in your own lab, and you can even get chemicals to do it, create graphene and use like jewelry sonicators, and like, there's plenty of homebrew tech, and that was a big thing I was all about. And you can join a hacker space and get involved with like BioCurious or other biohacker labs, and there's a lot of ways that you can actually get involved with making this technology. The thing is, IARPA, like we've talked about IARPA before, they will, like intelligence advanced research projects will, in a high risk, high payoff research, like they might pay you off, but a lot of times
And it's
like,
research. It's like it's
Yeah.
possible, and you purposefully disassemble the teams. that
right, you're gonna make
put
a
it together.
lens, and you're not gonna know what the lens was for. You're gonna make a sensor, and you're not gonna know what that sensor was in.
You're not going to know how to anneal it because
Yeah.
right. It takes 3 weeks to cool down some lenses, and you have to have a very specific pattern. And it's like, so another example of this, China was building a elevated, or it was just, I think, a giant highway through a desert. Okay. And they were doing calculations based on the equipment they were using. They're like, the ground is nowhere near level. There's sand dunes. They're actually rather fixed in place in this area, but they're in the wrong place. Now there is technology that, almost like the Power Rangers, they assemble into this giant cohesive thing where they've each got a unique piece of the key. And it's more like Captain Planet. Our powers combined, and then you can move a mountain of sand in like 2 days. And whoever like sees it happen doesn't really ever believe. It's like easier to believe that it was a dream, or but the technology is difficult enough that it's not readily rediscovered.
Dude, look at this video right here, though.
There's a
This
science
is
to keeping secrets like that.
This is
You don't have
exactly
to kill
why.
people afterwards, usually.
This is exactly why I find it hard. Like, look at this. Like, I get it. There's like laws and principles here, but this is essentially what's happening. Like on a lot of levels, right? And that's freaking nuts. And you're just like, okay, yeah, but it happens all the time. Like, okay, sure it does, but what the freaking? That just seems like divine.
No, maybe there's a plan to uncover the Sahara Desert, and in
And why
30
does
years,
it do it? Because it's
just
carbon.
it's gonna
It only
disappear.
could do this because it's carbon. Because carbon has this obsession with hex patterning.
But it doesn't necessarily do this always. There's certain conditions where it will do this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it does this a lot.
Well, so most atoms,
carbon loves
the fact
to
that
do
it's a
this because of
two-dimensional
its
lattice is unique
Yeah.
for carbons, and carbon tends to involve itself with covalent bonds as opposed to ionic bonds, and that's why it's like not quite a metal. I'm not even sure it's a transition metal.
It can be.
But there's rule break. Again, those
Yeah, it's
substances
just
have rules broken all the time as well.
Here's a mem. Have you ever seen like memes before? Like this is what we're building now because of that technology. Right? This is
mem?
This is chemical engines.
Oh, right.
That's nuts.
That's literally how a flagella works. Like if you could make a little box and like take off the cellular membrane, the thing that rotates the flagella, it's like literally that's what it is. And so when we say we're going to create nanobots that do things like our body has already created this. It's like everything turns into a crab. There are literally molecules that have a couple benzene rings and then two like binding sites, and they go around, and like one's the claw, the big claw, and the other one's the little claw. And that's if what they teach is correct, is that's how when you assay it out and you boil down the chemicals, you figure out what ratio they're in, and then the geometry that they end up, again, is usually not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. And H2O, still 3 points, only defines a plane. As soon as you add a fourth atom, then you end up with that one at the center, one here, and a triangle at the bottom. And now you're working with geometry that's kind of based on equally repulsive forces. And the idea that the electrons spread themselves out each time things kind of snap into a new energy state and then the bond angles change.
Yeah, like even like look at this right here. Like even if you introduce like radical particles, then the structure still it comes up with something that is following those principles, right? So you still end up with something that follows those principles. And so we see that in nature all the time, which I think we looked at earlier. I don't know where I have the picture.
The weird one is water, and water
folds.
is polar. And so you would expect like 3 atoms, right? H2O. You would expect the H to be in the middle and the 2 O's on the end. It would be in a straight line. But in reality, water has a bend angle. And that is what gives it all of its unique properties that seem to be the only thing, one of the major things that allow life, once it has already reached our complexity, to persist, let alone...
There's nothing more interesting than sp2 orbital. Like sp2 orbitals are freaking fascinating. If you just look at how... well, P2 orbitals are cool too. But sp2 orbitals make the world go round. I don't know what else you could say. Like they make space, and they make they make the lack of space necessary so that things come together, right? So everything is following these approximations because there's, and this is kind of similar, like, you know,
You make dimensional reality.
we're talking about like perfect circles or something like that. Think of a perfect circle, right? I mean,
So Jacob Chansley got invited to Michael Malice's house over the holidays. But I feel like if in the back of class, when I would talk over the lecture, because I had like read ahead, this is what it was like when in the physics class, you had the kids from the sports teams, kind of jocks, and the skaters, and somehow this is the conversation we'd be having in the back of class if we had the internet back then. And it's like you kind of got to get the words out quickly, almost like a TED talk. It's timed, and then it's like impact per second, Jason Silva style. But then the teacher's about to tell you to shut up again. It's not your turn to talk. You're disrupting the class.
I don't know. I got primordial soup. We could talk about that more. I think I'd like to prove at some point. We should talk more about abiogenesis and the proof of CERN experiments and like why CERN experiments are actually valuable. Because I think a lot of people think CERN's like a big waste.
Whatever happened to CERN filming those trans-dimensional entity things?
Are you concerned about CERN again, Burn? I like the
Was that
sometimes
the costume characters that
apparently them freaking light things that come through? Kind of strange.
I don't think I got a box saga demand, so that's good. We can get out without that. How about more Quake? I like that Quake song.
I sense the ground quaking beneath my soul.
I'm gonna take off though. Much love, y'all.
I sense the heavens crumbling, losing control.
BurnEye.
I sense my pulse.
Man, the myth and legend.
A rhythmic
Make sure you guys check out Crypto Alchemist.
whenever you draw near, can't
Alchemist
deny
channel right here.
me. Oh baby, when
Makes a lot
I
of
catch
cool
your
videos.
gaze, soft as
Make sure
a
you guys go to
breeze
Transcendent
on a
Philosophy's
summer
page.
day.